Friends, if you're looking for real old school laughs, you're in for a treat because we've got them right here. Flip City Magazine. Remember Mad Magazine? Then it went woke? Well, don't worry. Flip City has no chance of going woke. That's right. 4 times a year, you'll get an actual printed magazine full of jokes, stories, comics, and more, all about today's pop culture, entertainment, and woke politics. Flip City takes terrible entertainment trends we love to hate with hilarious parodies of Lord of the Rings, Stranger Things, The Walking Dead, Star Trek, Hunters, and more. Trust me when I say there is nothing else like Flip City on the market. So subscribe today. It will be delivered in print, or you can even get it digitally if you're one of those wacky Zoomers. Either way, follow our link and sign up today, and if you put in midnight, you get an extra 10% off. Check out Flip City Magazine today. Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, the 10th day of the year. I am Tom Connors. Welcome to Midnight's Edge in the morning. We have with us a full panel today, a special guest, so let's not waste too much time here. Making his way in at the last second, we have Mr. Paul Chato. How you doing?
You guys started early. I'm just making lunch. I'm going to dip out. and sorry.
There goes the monetization already.
There it goes. My apologies.
20 seconds, Paul. 20
That's got to be a record for me.
Yeah. But welcome. Good morning. I hope you're doing well. I just finished watching your video actually not too long ago here.
Thank you. Thanks for your 5.1 cents.
You're welcome. Also, we have, of course, speaking of Canadians, we have the script doctor with us. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm currently got my targets in sight at the USS Daycare. Going to blow that out of the water. It's a little inside joke to Paul's recent video.
Yes.
So
I was going to say, yeah.
I didn't get to see it yet. I saw the link for it.
I did see the video though, but yeah. But anyhow, we also have with us, that's Culture Casino. You hear the voice and you know the name.
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
How you doing today?
Fantastic. I had a lovely 6-minute stream of the news update. It was great. It wasn't appalling news, but it was good.
Why?
Yeah, when you've got an enlarged prostate, having a good stream is always good news.
Oh my goodness. Really, Paul?
What am I saying?
You're worse than Culture.
Look, we can't have a dad joke off this morning. We
the health update segment comes later, Paul.
Oh,
yeah, I was gonna say. Usually it's Culture who's giving us all the definitions of this stuff, and now you're just. Anyhow, we have with us, of course, Six as well, the producer extraordinaire.
Good morning. It's
how are
a
you doing?
beautiful cloudy day here in the Midwest.
We're glad to have you here.
Aren't they all?
Yes,
And of course, we have the boss man as well. If he's back, how you doing, Andre?
Of course. Greetings, everyone. Glad to be here and glad to be here with such an amazing panel, special guests and everything.
Yeah, speaking of, let's introduce our very special guest now. We want to thank Mexican Iron Man for helping facilitate this. We have with us Hogue Law, a.k.a. Richard Hogue. How you doing this morning? Glad to have you here.
I'm doing well. I'm not sure special guest is the proper designation. It's always a bad idea to bring in the lawyers, right?
Well,
We
that
love
depends on
lawyers.
who you're representing.
yeah, and as long as I'm not being billed, it's fine.
We have lots of lawyer jokes here.
I will turn off the billing. No problem.
I'm sure you've heard every lawyer joke.
I think my favorite version of lawyer jokes is always the good start ones. What do you call 10,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean, etc.?
Yeah.
So I understand that. It's a conflict-oriented profession.
Sure.
But hopefully I can offer some insight here.
Did you know why New York has all the lawyers and New Jersey has all the toxic waste sites?
No, why?
Because New Jersey picked first.
Wow.
But I'm bumped.
This is fair.
a lot of bad problems are buried in New Jersey.
That's right. A pleasure to meet you there.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, indeed. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some Mickey Mouse law and all that kind of business. Before we get too deep into that, Dr. Longdongler's here and sends us a thumbs up sticker for £1.99. So while you're at it, pound that like button, share out the stream, let everybody know that we're live, and maybe they'll come join us. We got J. Eddie Maldonado. There we go. I'll get it right eventually. Sending in $1.99. Says aliens in Miami. Opinions? Well, not to get too deep into that subject. But I think it was a big distraction.
Are these the aliens that turned out to be black people?
Sort of, kind of. Culture, your karate is not as good as your kung fu again.
Oh, dang it. Okay. Yeah, no, it turned out to be a riot. With fireworks. In
Yeah.
the mall.
Yeah.
Not giant shadow aliens as advertised.
Oh,
I was hoping.
oh, just Florida being Florida.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
Florida man.
Another day.
Well,
at the
actually,
Florida
Florida
Mall.
kids in this case. A bunch of kids.
Well, it seems like the first guy in the office is attempt at the psyop or something like that. But
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it's Florida. I mean, the FBI in Florida. You don't have to be too smart.
Shenanigans.
All my Florida friends are going to kill me.
Yeah.
Man, we are not hitting with the jokes today. We get Paul back here.
Let's get out of here, Paul. Patrick Robinson sends in $9.99. Says, Tom, I wanted to ask Monday, but when you were talking about TV show remakes, I wanted to know what you thought of Get Smart. People seem mixed on it, but I loved it. Now, are you talking about the remake movie with Steve Carell, or are you talking about the revival they did?
With
Was
Andy
it
Dick?
late 80s and 90s?
no,
Yeah,
no.
early 90s, something like that, somewhere in there.
Well, let's
original-
pretend that he means both.
I
Well-
want to pretend he means the original show.
Well-
Because the fact that they remade it was terrible.
I was just gonna say, yeah, the remake with Andy Dick, horrible. The Steve
Yes.
Carell one, probably
Not
on the
so
lower end of the.
Not so bad. Their companion movie was
Yeah.
okay as well because they
was
shot
okay.
2 movies at the same time and
Yeah,
essentially under the same budget. And then
this was the DVD craze. Yeah, they did the same
Yeah.
thing with Anchorman as well.
Actually, Patrick, you should be cast as Smart. I think you'd be a great Smart. Good actor.
Oh, you mean Richard?
Oh, Patrick.
Patrick Robinson, the super chatter. Yeah.
Oh, Patrick. Oh, in the shit. I can't see his. I mean, you can see his face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of super eyes do you got?
Culture screen is bigger than yours, Tom.
Dude, I have a 50-some inch.
He's
like-
always compensating for shit.
Oh my god.
I only have a 22-inch screen and I can make
Yeah,
big face.
well, yeah, but you're like you got like superhuman powers and shit. I'm not totally convinced yet.
He has no face and good glasses.
Exactly. There's nobody in the world that's really a real person like Script Doctor. He's got to be an alien or something.
And no nose to hold up those glasses.
That's right. Doug
Oh,
1980. Doug 1985. VA loves horror sends in 4.99 says aliens, disgusting stuff in NYC tunnels. YouTube beef, man attacks judge 10 days into 2024. Yeah, these are
and
all things that have happened
Swedish
so far.
Authorities are warning the Swedish people to brace for war with Russia. So yeah, it's a fantastic start.
So I actually, since we have the wonderful lawyer joining us this morning, is it smart to jump over the bench and attack the judge? Is that a good plan?
Well, I can't give legal advice on YouTube or in this context, but I can suggest that anytime you find yourself in a government facility with a desire to jump one of the government officials in that building, you might have a problem with the law.
Yeah.
So there's no chance of if you succeed and they're not able to say press charges or counter charges, you can't walk away from it.
It's a difficult one to imagine a good outcome in,
Right.
which of course is not formal legal advice.
No.
But hey,
All right. But yes, these are all actual events that have actually happened so far in 2024. And speaking of events that have happened so far in 2024, let's get into our news today, or our topics as it were. And let's navigate, at least as best we can, through uncharted copyright waters when it comes to Steamboat Willie. Because this is one of the main reasons we had Richard join us today, and that is because this is a very confusing subject for a lot of people because to most people's understanding, public domain means public domain. But as I tried to warn some people, and I'm not trying to play all I told you so, but as I tried to warn people, when it comes to things like this, it's going to get sticky. And until a few cases probably actually go down, we're not going to exactly know where the ruling is going to fall. And I've even cited some other cases that might be brought into the equation, even though if they're not apples to apple comparisons. You had like the Friday the 13th Jason argument that just happened not too long ago that I think could, be brought up as a possible case here as well when it comes to Mickey Mouse. But the big confusion is what you're able to use, because everybody who went and loaded up Steamboat Willie on YouTube and other various places the other day learned quickly that Disney is still going to come after you for various means. And even if they drop one claim, you may get another claim for music or something else. And I'd given my reasons in the past, but I want to open the floor for Richard, because you actually did a stream about this recently yourself. So give us your overview of this entire case and your take on this whole thing when it comes to Mickey.
Yeah, I mean, the very first thing, which again is not formal legal advice, but is just a general good rule for living,
Right.
is that you don't want to find yourself on the opposite end of a lawsuit with someone with a lot of resources, right? And that's the human condition. That's not a perfect justice system. And I'm a corporate attorney. I've been doing transactional law for about 20 years now, and it just is the case that regardless of what the law says, and we can absolutely talk about the specifics there on Steamboat Willie and public domain in general, you don't want to be in a situation where you find yourself having to defend yourself in a courtroom and paying lawyers for the privilege. So one of the things that people have to watch out for is that big corporate actors like a Disney, whether or not they're acting under the power of law or not, is going to create a problem for especially little creators that don't necessarily have any desire to go to court or any ability to pay for lawyers to cover that court cost. And if you're not of a certain size, say a Cartoon Network size, if you saw what Adult Swim did the other day, then you're not going to be able to really defend against these things in a reasonable fashion. Now, that being said, the way this works is that Steamboat Willie and Plane Crazies and some other stuff from the early 20s or the late 20s, 1928 and 1929, became public domain when the 95th anniversary of their publication happened under the current Copyright Act of the United States. So that's January 1st, 2024 for us following along at home. But the way YouTube works is that they don't just have a DMCA kind of takedown process that people can go through and give a notice to YouTube and say, hey, this is infringing, take it down. They have an automated process that I suspect a lot of people are familiar with called Content ID that allows big copyright holders like a Disney to go and upload their stuff to a database, and then YouTube essentially checks against that database when they're uploading videos from folks that aren't at that level, right? So if you or I put a video up, upload it to YouTube, it's doing a check before it monetizes or does some other stuff as part of the publishing process against that big database. And Disney, it appears, we don't know for certain what happened here, but Disney, it appears, uploaded Steamboat Willie to the Content ID at some point in the past as theirs properly. And then when it became public domain, they didn't take it out on January 1st. So the people that really wanted to push things at the earliest time point, January 1st to 10th here, got some strikes or claims that they probably shouldn't have and challenged those. And you see in the news, Disney's back down on some of those, but it's essentially at their discretion whether or not they want to cause trouble for you. And that's a problem for everybody that's trying to go out there and create things. And it's a problem for the law because Steamboat Willie itself is supposed to be in the public domain. Now, you might also know that content creators are not the best at necessarily following the rules of a fair use or public domain or intellectual property use argument on YouTube or otherwise. And so there are a lot of reports out there that suggest that Steamboat Willie just coming into the public domain gives people every right they want to use Mickey Mouse or anything else that appears in Steamboat Willie on their channel or to do other things with. And that isn't the case, right? The only thing that came into the public domain was Steamboat Willie. And that's Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse as they appear in that particular cartoon from 95 years ago. And with any piece of property that has an evolution, somebody like Disney has enhanced and improved or changed the Mickey Mouse character over the course of that near 100-year period. So you don't have Fantasia Mickey. He's not available yet. And if you try to make a derivative work where you take Steamboat Willie and put him in a wizard's costume and things like that, the lawyers in the room will start to get agitated, little heartburn, and you'll get closer and closer to potentially deliberately infringing Disney's existing public domain copyright. And the case that I like to use, I used this on Virtual Legality on my channel the other day to kind of help explain this, was one that the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle estate brought against Netflix a few years back for the Enola Holmes movie. You might remember.
Yes.
And this is a good case because it was brought during a period in time where the Sherlock Holmes character was in the public domain for the bulk of its library of writings. But because the Doyle estate, or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself, wrote for such a long period using the Sherlock Holmes character, while most of it was in the public domain, there was still stuff that wasn't. And so the courts actually had to go and speak about the fact that you can use the characters as they existed, however they hit the public domain, but you can't use what happened afterwards in those stories that happened after the public domain period after the date that the public domain kind of window would have subsumed when they were originally written, meaning that there were 10 pieces of writing at the time of that particular case that were still copyright protected. And so you had to watch for those various things. And so it's important for people to understand that it's never as obvious as just you can use Mickey Mouse now, you can use Minnie Mouse now. You can only use what appears in Steamboat Willie. And you have to be careful about what derivatives you create even from that, so as to not kind of step on the toes of what Disney did with their own evolutions. And you could maybe make an argument in court for kind of an organic development of the character along the same lines, but you're going to get in more and more trouble with Disney. And as I said at the start of this conversation, the biggest problem is Disney's a major litigious actor, right? This is how they've operated for their entire existence. In fact, the copyright period is 95 years, primarily because the Disney Corporation asked for it to be more than 56 years, and then more than 76 years, I think was the number, at different times in American history to get to this 95-year number, where it appears they eventually stopped, primarily because there's no will in the legislature to really extend it again. And so you always have to be careful as an individual or even a small company with what fights you choose to pick and what you're willing to defend, because at the end of the day, the cost, whether it's psychic or monetary, is going to be inflicted upon you when you get that cease and desist letter to begin with, whether or not they have a good legal argument.
Right, because that's kind of what I was pointing towards, is until we actually have a few cases play out in court, I don't think that there is going to be a clear answer to this, because this will be one of the earlier cases of where we have a character that originated in a film, not a book or another form of media, where you're working on a different sort of adaptation. You're actually adapting something that is a film already, so it's like, or trying to, at least what some people are doing. So I can see that being a problem. Plus you have the other side of this, not to skip over the derivative work part, because that's something I also want to get back to, but something I think that we should probably point out first is just the whole idea of basically what the difference between like parody is and what you should legally be able to do with this character compared to what Disney has as far as a trademark over Mickey Mouse as well. Because I think that's a bigger issue here that I think we need to, I guess, explore as far as this goes too. Because this is also complicated because, we have characters like Robin Hood and all these other ones, but Robin Hood isn't exactly a trademark for a specific company as the character is in the book, right? Like to where Mickey Mouse, like Disney even went back a few years back here and started using Steamboat Willie in their intro for Disney animation. So there's even people who are arguing, well, they have that part copyrighted now. So it's like, where does this begin? Where does it end? It's a trademark now. So how does that get funky when it comes to this kind of a thing?
Yeah, no, trademark's a great direction to go in on this, because that is likely one of the arguments Disney will make. And I think it's important to make the distinction between copyright and trademark, because I think even judges and justices at the Supreme Court and others get this a little bit confused as they discuss intellectual property. Copyright is the protection that an artistic creator has in the work that they create. So it's the entire book of Winnie the Pooh. It's the entire movie, Steamboat Willie, whatever that might be. Trademark is a short phrase or name or character that is supposed to evidence the originator of the work, right? So a trademark is literally a mark in trade. You're supposed to be able to say, okay, if this name appears or if this character appears, I know this party made this thing. And so, as a for instance, with that Cartoon Network reference that I saw you use from Adult Swim, it's actually probably useful for them to be as crass as they are in that particular usage, because it's obvious that that's not Disney. Disney wouldn't put that up there like that with Steamboat Willie, even though it's a derivative and not Steamboat Willie itself, right? So when we started all this, when we look at Content ID and YouTube, the thing that should be the most protected is just playing Steamboat Willie. It's almost the opposite of fair use, honestly. You're most protected in not really changing anything that's fully in the public domain. So public domain works like Steamboat Willie should be protected for just showing out there like people have been doing on YouTube, but Content ID makes that a little bit more complicated and is in fact more than the law requires YouTube to do. So there's a lot of different aspects of this, but for the trademark side of things, yes, it is worth noting that Steamboat Willie has been used by Disney at the front of their animated studios films for a couple of years now, presumably with the sense of setting up as a kind of trademark notion that when you see Steamboat Willie, you think it's Disney. So we're going to associate it with our name as well as possible, so that when we go and seek a trademark specifically for that purpose, or otherwise try to prosecute someone on the basis of that trademark, people will recognize that, okay, yes, Steamboat Willie itself, that whistling mouse, means the Disney Corporation made it. But there is some pretty good precedent in the law that says you got to be careful with this, because if you just allowed corporations to take a character like a Sherlock Holmes or a Mickey Mouse, or I think at the time it was Peter Rabbit and some others that we've seen be litigated in the court system, and say, okay, they're a trademark of our company, then you'd allow them to get past the whole public domain concept, right? Copyright is only supposed to last for a specific amount of time. And if you create this kind of mutant of copyright law using trademark, you'd allow these copyright owners more protection than the law is supposed to afford them. So while Disney might go down that road, in fact, I suspect as a litigious company, they likely will, then it's still not a given that they would win at the court of law at the end of the day with that type of argument. Unfortunately, like I said, most creators or most people that would use the intellectual property and get that cease and desist letter from Disney or the lawsuit from Disney aren't going to want to pursue that to the end. In fact, almost all civil lawsuits end in a settlement, including the Enola Holmes case that I just brought up, right? They had some interesting questions that would have been useful for society to know the answers to. That settled between Netflix and the Conan Doyle estate. And so we don't get the answers to those questions, even though we think some of what the estate claimed is probably spurious, probably isn't a winning intellectual property argument. A lot of the law doesn't get to that final answer. And so a lot of lawyers wind up having to tell you, well, maybe I can tell you what I think is the stronger argument under these statutes or what's happening here, but we don't actually have a clean line of cases, because for the most part, it doesn't make sense for the parties involved here to get to the end state and pay the lawyers for however long it takes to get to that end state.
Right. And that's a good point too. Now, does anybody else have any more questions on the stuff that we've already discussed before we move into further more topics on this? Because I didn't want to jump to something else.
One thing to address is that this is U.S. copyright law. And in fact, there are some things that were made in the United States that are public domain in other countries. There are some properties made in the UK. For instance, James Bond is public domain in Canada, the original James Bond books. So if Canada wanted to, say, produce an adaptation of those books in, say, animation or miniseries form for primarily distribution in Canada, they could without infringing on any copyright. However, it does get into a bit more of a complicated mess if they also try to set up an LLC to distribute those in the United States, where Eon Productions kind of has a hold on that for distribution when making those films there. So it's going to be very messy in the next decade or so when it comes to litigating who owns what and what level of use can be made. That's a direct use and not something that can be protected under parity.
No, that's a great point. And I would absolutely add that I'm an American lawyer. And I don't pretend to speak on every jurisdiction's laws, but certainly intellectual property is a creature of law, right? It is a legal fiction. It is created entirely by the statutes of these jurisdictions. And so I'm talking about United States law, which is often one of the most important when we talk about entertainment and media, but not the only one that's important. And certainly other jurisdictions can have different rules on these things. And then it gets even more complicated because most of the jurisdictions that we might think of talking about have international treaties of acknowledgement with each other that have certain exceptions that apply different things to various intellectual property rules that they might have. And so, yes, it gets enormously complicated. And that's before we even see this 95-year kind of public domain window get to some of the more complicated Disney properties, right? I mean, the irony here is that Disney built its kingdom, if you will, on using public domain works, right? You got Snow White, you've got Robin Hood, you've got Cinderella, you've got the things that they made derivatives of, which are protected because of what they added to them, whether it's Cinderella's dress or various aspects of
the Seven Dwarfs, etc. Yeah.
Yes, the Seven Dwarfs. The things that Disney added are theirs, but they were based on public domain in the first instance. You could get into a similar situation, but when you get that 95-year window going past more and more complicated works than just Steamboat Willie, you really get to see the Disney lawyers make their money.
Yeah, and that's where I was saying earlier, is I think in script was alluding to it too, is it's going to be messy over the next few years until we see some of these cases play out. And I think you're right, Richard, that the first few are going to either just back off and cease and desist once they see that letter, and or they're going to settle, out of court. So I don't think we're going to get an answer for a while. And I think that's going to be part of the problem, because that's one of the things we learn very often from like our good lawyer friends like Andrew of Legal Mindset, for instance, and others, is that the one thing that keeps these copyrights active the most is more or less whether or not somebody protects them or not, more than anything. So as long as Disney's able to, they're going to continue to protect Mickey until they lose one of these cases, is basically my theory on this. And they're going to take it to the limit. It could be another 10 years, like Script said, before we have this all sorted out. I think you're right.
Well, and the bigger problem from a kind of legal jurisprudence side of things for that is that if Disney looks like they're going to lose a case, or if they think they're going to, then they settle that one, right? You don't want to put precedent out there that is bad for your future actions. But we can continue to talk about where it is looking like it's clearly abusive, like when it strikes just the showing of the film. But it's definitely much more complicated when you get into, okay, so here's a picture of Steamboat Willie, Mickey Mouse, and he looks like he's endorsing this grill, and you get into these various standpoints where I think people think that it's broader than it is, and it might be broader than Disney thinks it is, but do you want to fight that out in court?
Exactly. No, and most normal folks don't have the kind of money or lawyers that Disney has to mount up against them. And that's the thing, is they could drag it out for years. And like you said, as soon as it looks like they're going to lose, they might just turn around and settle somehow and make sure it doesn't. Because that's the thing. Speaking of precedent, because this is where I wanted to jump to derivative works. And this is where I brought up Friday the 13th earlier. Because what happened is there was a 1976 law that a creator could go back and claim their original creation. And so Victor Miller tried to do that with Friday the 13th, and Sean S. Cunningham tried to stop him as the producer, claiming it was a work for hire. Well, at the end, Victor Miller won the case for the most part. The only thing he didn't get was Friday the 13th. The one thing that stood in the air at the end was Jason and how that was going to be handled, because the character was considered vastly different from his original creation. But at the end of the day, the court decided, no, he wasn't. He was the same character. It's a derivative work. So Victor Miller owns all of the versions, no matter what. So that's where I'm wondering because that's where I think this case is going to boil down to, is at the end of the day, is it's going to decide on whether or not the court decides that all the versions of Mickey Mouse are derivative of that original version, and who they decide has then the right to use it. And unfortunately, in this case, I think they might side with Disney, but I'm curious to hear what you think about that. But whether or not you think that's what it's going to boil down to.
Disney still owns Mickey Mouse, right? So they own all the rights to every version of Mickey Mouse past 1928. The Disney Mickey Mouse that appears in Steamboat Willie is now public domain. And so if you wanted to use that Mickey Mouse and colorize him on your own and do certain things with his character or whatnot on your own, that should be protectable by you, and it should be within the public domain. I can't speak to that because we can't speak without specifics as to what any given use might be. But that doesn't mean, even if it should be in the public domain and it should be a fair use, it should be an allowed legal use of that intellectual property, that you won't get a call from Disney's lawyers. So it's always something that you got to think about when we talk about this. So I do think Disney's going to have the rights to protect all of its Mickey Mouse versions through 2024 for a long time, and that public domain window is going to continue, and it's probably going to stay at 95 years from the looks of things. But people are going to have to be careful how they use even Steamboat Willie Mickey or the ones that come into the public domain, because if you had a use that looks like the way that Disney evolved Mickey Mouse with their ownership, you might get into an infringing situation.
Yeah, that's a very good point too. Any more questions from the panel?
Yeah, I have a quick one.
Yeah,
and because you mentioned, because this also goes back to Steamboat Willie, because you said that the way that it does work, for instance, on YouTube. is that the copyright holders, for instance, Disney, they upload the stuff that they want protected, for instance, Steamboat Willie, into this copyright database, and then YouTube looks for matches.
That's right.
And evidently they forgot to remove it after January 1st, because people still get various copyright claims, whether it be for the visuals, for the audio, or some combination. Are they allowed to still keep it there? Doesn't that seem like frivolous? Because that means that if they're allowed to keep it there, when for something that is supposed to be public domain, what is then to prevent someone from deciding that something else public domain? Like, for instance, say that we were to find a public domain movie or something, and then decide, you know what, that's ours now, so we're going to upload this thing to this government, claim it as ours. Is there some kind of like protection against this? Can
I wish
this
I could say yes.
claim that this is theirs, even though it's now public domain?
No, it's primarily contractual protection, right? So the YouTube Content ID system and other platforms have similar kind of matching systems. It's not just YouTube. That system is primarily referred to as DMCA Plus because it offers more protection to the copyright holders than just the DMCA, which has that kind of formalized notice and takedown system that we talked about. And so, no, the protection is that YouTube says, don't abuse this. You promise when you put something in this database that you have the rights to put it here, that you're the exclusive holder of the copyright. And if you abuse this, we could limit your use of Content ID. We could strip you of your platform, and these various things that are all very harsh sounding, but are unlikely for YouTube to use against a company like Disney. And so YouTube itself should be looking at some of these things, but also doesn't want to take on the liability for missing something, right? So the DMCA, that law that we talk about so often, sits out there and says these platforms can have user-generated content and not be responsible for infringement as long as they respond to a notice to take down. They set up this system, they take it down when they're told, and then they say it's not our fault if it's in the public domain. That's all well and good. YouTube should probably have its feet held to the fire a little bit more on this. But no, there isn't a real legal action there because for the most part, people are putting content on YouTube under the YouTube terms and conditions, which say YouTube can remove this whenever we feel like.
Well, the biggest problem with the YouTube system is that it does not punish people who claim copyright.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's
false
not
claimers,
abuse of the system.
Yeah, there is no penalty. There's no banning saying, okay, after 2 times you've made a false claim, you are now completely banned from YouTube. There needs to be a penalty for people who make false claims, or even
I tend to agree
who not just
more
false claims, but maybe extend the claim that they believe that they have.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree that there should be more teeth for abuse of the DMCA process and
Correct.
the Content ID process and these various things. That doesn't exist right now, but I think that that's a worthwhile thing to continue to harp on and pound the table on.
So I have a
because I do think there's a capacity for that abuse.
So I have a question. Is that number one is, yes, we know that YouTube is suffused with individuals that just want to put up shit and copy other people's stuff. I mean, we
Unfortunately.
Yes, and there's like, you know, the original content creators such as this wonderful channel here that has interesting panelists and tries to discuss things in a mature way, which is why you're included in this discussion. And that's why I haven't spoken very much. But here it comes. So I mean, the people who want to do something with this, I mean, I just think that's silly. Make up your own shit. Like, just ignore it. But on the other hand, is there some kind of precedent that people are trying to push that will be useful for future issues that this is bringing up? Or are people using this as a way to figure out how things are going to work in the future?
Well, I think Disney's stuff getting into the public domain was always kind of a significant landmark event for copyright law in the United States because of Disney's history over the past 100 years of extending the copyright and knowing how litigious they are about uses of their property. So I think there is value in pressing them and trying to get precedent set for the law to be understood by more and more people. But as a lawyer who's seen things both in law school and in real life not go the way people had assumed they would go, I'm not sure that we actually wind up with a great precedent at the end of all this.
Mm.
And so I caution everyone to try to make sure you know what you're doing on this stuff.
Or just don't bother. Ignore it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not about to make anything with Steamboat Willie Mickey or otherwise, but I will talk about it. And I this is still on the screen right now, and I think that's totally fine. But who knows what Disney thinks about that? And Disney can use the tools at its disposal to try to make trouble for people. So yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that you need to be kind of realpolitik about to some extent, which is, hey, they're a big company with a lot of money and a lot of lawyers.
And what's the upside for you?
Yeah. What are you seeking to gain here? Maybe you can make the case. This is very similar to a conversation.
Patent law is horrible. Extensions of worthless patents. That's also a horrible subject.
Oh yeah, we've got patents that are on the books that probably should never have been issued, and we've got trolls and all sorts of things within intellectual property. I think intellectual property as an aspiration is still a pretty good one for various aspects of the law, but it's certainly been shown to have problems in actual execution for a lot longer than I've been practicing law.
Well, and I like your question, Paul, because it's actually kind of it brings me to this point here is, as far as like pushing these things, because to this point there has been a lot of cartoons and things in the public domain, but we haven't had somebody say, for instance, like, look at this. Here's a great example. This is a compilation. Superman's on the cover, but it's got a hell of a lot of other. It's more than just Superman. It's a bunch of other public domain cartoons. Now, Superman himself is technically not in the public domain yet, but these cartoons are the Fleischer ones, right? Because their copyright has lapsed. So you can find these just about anywhere at any like cheap, dollar store or wherever, and you get them for cheap. And there's like 15 cartoons on here, right? So this is what we've seen in the past. But my point I was getting to is we haven't seen people actually turn around and try to redo the Fleischer Supermans. But that's probably because Superman himself is in the public domain. There's been other Looney Tunes and Betty Boop and other cartoons that have fallen into that category over the years for several different reasons, but nobody's attempted to push that copyright like Paul was pointing out here with Mickey Mouse. I think that is a pertinent point, and I think it's something we do have to kind of push as a people to kind of push ourselves forward as artistically, although I do also agree with just make something new.
In other words, someone needs to basically break the rules as they are right now, get sued and say, I have the money to do this, to fight you all the way in court, because that is how change is being made, right? It doesn't happen any other way.
Yep. I'm just trying to figure out what the benefit is regarding this. I'm just trying to figure it out.
So yeah, basically, right. Nelson and so basically Elon Musk, for instance, he should start a YouTube channel and upload a bunch of Disney shorts there. See what happens and be ready to take it all the way. That's how we solve this.
Yeah, and copyright is an interesting thing. You can get the entire first 2 seasons of the Beverly Hillbillies in black and white on DVD, but they've cut out all the music.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother, bag of worms here.
They can't have, it was a story about a man named Jed. So because that is a separate copyright.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, and that's a little bit different animal than what we're necessarily talking about here, but it is kind of,
what was their name? Scrugg and Tugs?
Something like that. But somebody was brought up earlier that Warner Brothers owns the Fleischer Supermans. But what they own is their recent 4K scans of them. See, and that gets into a little bit muddier domain here. And this is another thing I kind of wanted to bring up with Richard here, or Rick, or whatever you prefer. Because that's something I've noticed too, especially when it comes to the YouTube side of things. There's several films and stuff like I just pointed out that are in the public domain. You see, now this specific disc that I showed you guys here, they watermark these, right? So if I tried to scan this and put this up on YouTube, this DigiView Entertainment could claim that as theirs because they made that scan. And I had a similar issue with Plan 9 from Outer Space and Night of the Living Dead. Another thing, like the best version of that out there is the Criterion scan, and they technically own that scan of it, but the movie itself is still technically in the it's a really muddy area because of all the stuff that had happened and gone through. So that's my next question. Is that another reason why Disney's possibly able to go after people's, because they're the only ones who really own any of these scans of Steamboat Willie? And I pointed this out, I think, on the first show of the year, where I said that until somebody actually probably gets their hands on a 35 millimeter print and scans it themselves, that's the only time Disney, I think, is not going to be able to say anything about this at this point. And that's the only time that you'll be able to put it on like one of these discs and sell it or whatever too, is my point.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a possibility, right? When you talk about scans, they're all derivative works of the original creation, right? Somewhere there's Steamboat Willie cells or whatever process they used to make the cartoon back in the 20s.
Yep.
And that was eventually put on film, and there'll be those rolls. And if you have some kind of reproduction of that, that's somebody that created that. But you do get into more complicated things when you run that through YouTube and you upload it, because that's its own conversion process. And you have all these various considerations that happen as part of all of these derivatives being created. I will be flat out honest with you. The copyright laws were not really written to contemplate digital recreation of things. So we're still years and years and years back. That's not really unusual in the law. Tech often exceeds the concepts that are within the law. The Copyright Act definitely needs to be looked at for what are digital recreations, what for sale should look like for digital recreations, what a derivative work should and shouldn't be when we talk about bits going through the internet. But that isn't how it exists right now. So I think there's probably a little bit more of a safer road with things like digitizing existing scans and being a little bit more okay with that. But there's also a legal argument to be made that folks shouldn't be okay with that. So again, you get into a company that wants to litigate over their watermarked cartoons, or wants to litigate over the fact that, Tom, I think you said it was a compilation of cartoons or a set of them. That in and of itself is protectable, right? Just taking things that are in the public domain and putting them together in a certain way can be protectable in certain circumstances. So
there was a, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but there is like
I
can't remember who it was who did it back in the day. They would take these public domain cartoons and they would add their own sound effects and music to them so they could copyright them. Exactly what you're saying right there.
Yeah, you create something new out of it, right? It's like you can get a copyright on an anthology of short stories that are in public domain if you do something that is deemed creative enough to get that protection. But that in of itself can create problems for somebody that wants to use those same stories or use those cartoons in a way that the creator of that compilation doesn't like, right? So derivative works are protected. Yes, derivative works are capable of protection, but that protection doesn't go back to what they were derived from, right? So
And
that's another aspect of
that
this.
now because of that Friday the 13th case, Rick. So that's
Yeah.
what I was wondering about, because at that point, that's why they had to go back into court about the whole thing. And at the end, they decided that nope, it's the same character no matter what. So Victor owns it.
But a character is different from the actual product. So, for instance, a good friend of mine, one of the best photographers in the world, Yuri Deutsch, has a very famous portrait of a girl in a swim cap, and there's a giant sunfish kissing her, and it's called Fish Kiss. And Rico in Australia got a different model, a different fish, hung up the wooden fish and kissed her with it. And he sued and he won, because there's no other fish kiss picture like that ever in the world. No one has ever done that before. So it doesn't matter that someone even created a variation of it, which under normal conditions would be okay, but because it was so unique, he has a copyright on the whole concept of a woman in a bathing cap being kissed by a fish.
Yeah, and intellectual property is weird that way, right? Because in general, copyright doesn't protect ideas; it doesn't protect concepts.
No, in this case, it did though.
Yeah, and you get the right judge on the right day, and you can get some interesting precedents on these things.
So that brings up something that I think is rather interesting, and also gets into the complicated nature of things. So. What we see here up on screen, the Steamboat Willie, that animated model and that Steamboat Willie is technically now public domain.
Yes.
Now, in about 15 years or so, on the Detective Comics side of things, Superman and Batman are going to get close to public domain. However, it's only the ones that are those specific models. But Warner Brothers did something kind of sneaky over the last 10 years. They've actually done animations using those exact models, like verbatim, like down to the minute detail, in another format, and that now is under initial copyright. So if you were to try and theoretically in 15 or 16 years do a Superman using the model from the comic book in 1938, would that not infringe on the copyright that was reestablished on the animation side of things, where that model was redone in that medium?
So I can't promise anything on that, obviously, because it would be all facts based on how that looked compared to what they did. But that is the kind of things. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that these corporations are likely to do and fight about, and a court's likely to come down one way or the other. And so you're trying to look into the future. The companies are trying to protect themselves like this. It's very similar to Steamboat Willie being used on the front of the Disney cartoons from all legal avenues, looking like they're trying to set up a trademark claim or strengthen a trademark claim at some point in the future. They might not go down that path, but it looks like folks are setting those kinds of things up. And while you should be able to use the model that comes into the public domain to make your own works that you can protect on your own, it's possible that those companies could bring an infringement claim against you and you'd be in trouble, or they could bring an infringement claim against you and it's just not worth it to you to fight it in court.
Right.
Yeah. So because let's say theoretically 10 years from now, 10 years from 1923, they made another Steamboat Willie using the same identical model. It would be hard to distinguish, well, which model are you using in your public domain claim, because they're both identical.
You muddy the waters.
10 years apart. Exactly.
So again, please correct me or clarify. I thought Steamboat Willie, the short, was public domain, not Mickey per se.
It's not Mickey the character, right? You can't use everything that ever happened to Mickey. You can't probably use his voice as it exists now.
I won't use that here. No, I won't. Sorry.
But Mickey, as he appears, is a part of Steamboat Willie. So yes, he enters the public domain at the same time.
Okay.
As he exists in 1928.
Right. He looks very similar to a lot of Mickeys over the years.
Yep.
He does, but note he doesn't have gloves.
Yeah,
he doesn't have gloves. He doesn't have coloration.
No suspenders.
But again, like Script was pointing out, Disney has used it as their logo for Disney animation. In fact, I think that's what this is from. I don't even think this is actually from the original Steamboat Willie that I have here. I think this is from the redo that they did for the Disney animation thing. It looks too good, actually. But in that being said, that's where I wonder is if they'll be able to kind of dangle that copyright out longer if they just keep doing that, because that's what DC has done over the years. Is they keep changing the logos and variants on the costumes and things so they can keep recopywriting like the Superman logo or the Batman logo and stuff like that too.
They copy new variations, and then recently they did a special, like a 75-year special for Superman, and they did all the variations of him in an animation. And it's basically like panels from the comic books from 1938 to the 60s, 70s, movies, everything. And it's a brand new work, but it uses all the existing models that were essentially subject to eventual public domain recently, and that is I believe intended to muddy the waters. So if someone wanted to make a Superman public domain Superman comic book at the time, the model that they're using even though they're drawing from it from the 1938, Warner Brothers has perfectly solid grounds to say, well, we also drew that model again in this period, and we've copyrighted that under this part, so that model is still ours, even though it's in conflict. It's part of the comic book there. It all now depends on a judge, the courts, to decide and what type of arguments you can make to say, well, is it still in public domain? Like that particular issue is in public domain, and maybe that character model for that year is in public domain, but you've got an identical one that is still owned by the initial copyright holder that has been kind of had their copyright sort of re-upped, if anything, back in like 2018.
You're not wrong. And I'm certain that these various corporations are thinking of it in that way. You do still have, I talked about the right judge on the right day. You still have the wrong judge on the right day when it comes to the corporate control of some of this copyright stuff, which is you have judges that are willing to look through and say, no, you can't just muddy copyright with an identical model. You can't just try to morph your copyrighted character into a trademark to get around the notion of copyright ending at 95 years. And so you could have that same kind of precedent from a judge that's looking through to intent on these kinds of things. It really depends on a whole host of facts and circumstances that we don't know. Why was this created? What emails are on the server that talk about exactly what was happening here? Mm-hmm. And intent could matter in that context, because a court enforcing copyright law is being asked to enforce its equitable powers to stop somebody from doing something, to award damages on the basis that you have been hurt. And if they don't think that you've been hurt, or if they don't think that you were essentially using good faith or clean hands to get to the place where you're at in that courtroom, then they might not give you what you want. In fact, the Enola Holmes case I talked about earlier was kind of premised on a loss that the Conan Doyle estate had earlier that said, hey, you can't say any of these things about Sherlock Holmes because there's still stuff that isn't in the public domain. And that all applies to a holistic view of Sherlock Holmes over the course of the entire body of works, right? And the court struck that down, saying, no, you could then bootstrap changes in a character to prevent these things from entering the public domain way back before before you should have any rights to protect this information. And the court said no. And it was only after that they brought the Enola Holmes case and said, hey, Sherlock Holmes in this movie is, I think he's warmer, he's nicer to dogs or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have those characteristics in the stuff that's in the public domain, so you can't do that. And we don't get the answers to the questions that court case posed, but you don't. It's clear that from the earlier precedents on this type of stuff, you can't try to bootstrap protections in a way that's going to offend the court's sensibilities of fairness.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, law, right? I mean, we got a lot of clear, bright line answers.
Well, and that's where, I said it before, and not to bring it up again, but it's not apples to apples, but it is kind of in the same vein with the whole Jason thing. Is that's where I wonder if they're just going to say, look, at this point, Disney has X amount more years of versions of this down the road. It's all derivative from the same character. They might just slam the books down and say, nope, Disney owns it until all the copyrights are clear or something like that. And again, hopefully we get a judge, like you said, that will stop them from hopping around through this, because that's another thing I think that needs to be stopped.
This will be taken to the Supreme Court. So it just mean every time there's a judge, there'll be an appeal and it'll be kicked up and up and up until they get to.
So with regards to Enola Holmes,
right.
how did they get away with the 7% solution?
Oh, right. Because that's a Nicholas Meyer invention, and that was used in a couple of other works recently. And
that had Sherlock Holmes in it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a copyright holder or a trademark holder has the right to pursue what they want to pursue with their exclusivity, right? So one of the problems that the estate was going to have in the Enola Holmes case was that they never sued over the making of the Enola Holmes books, right? So Netflix comes in and licenses the books rights, or Legendary does, and they make a movie out of it. Netflix then gets sued. They were going to have an unclean hands problem at the lawsuit level, which is to say, you guys didn't sue over the original infringement, so what are we supposed to do now?
Mm-hmm.
And so
you think this went in Netflix's favor then?
Well, I think that was a point that Netflix was going to have on their side, and probably led to a settlement that was maybe a little bit different than what the estate would have hoped for. But even as I describe it, you can see that the estate is perhaps exceeding its copyright bounds just by bringing certain of the claims against Netflix in the first place.
But I'm just thinking, how did they get away with 7% solution? I mean, in 76, right? I mean, that was a book.
Did Nick have maybe permission from the estate, perhaps?
I doubt they would have liked to have had Sherlock Holmes being examined by Sigmund Freud for cocaine addiction.
I mean, the fact that you're putting those two characters together.
Anyway.
I don't know the answer to that specific question, unfortunately, but I do know that the estate licensed out the Sherlock Holmes character. That was one of the bases for damages from Netflix, was saying, hey, look, this is what we do, is we license out Sherlock Holmes. It has value to us. You didn't want to give us this money. And so they say, well, it was in the public domain, Enola Holmes, and the way Sherlock Holmes appears in Enola Holmes is not a violation, and then they settle it. So we don't have a full answer.
Because I am a comedy aficionado, then does parody mitigate things? So you had Sherlock Holmes' smarter younger brother.
Yeah, yes. So parody is a kind of fair use adjacent concept, right? So copyright only protects the exclusive rights to a certain point, and then you can do things like comment on them. You can do news and commentary through fair use. You can do parody. You can do various things that are going to be clear that they aren't otherwise endorsed by the original owner, right? So parody is protected under essentially the freedom of speech in the United States, First Amendment.
Interesting. Okay.
And so it's kind of an adjacent concept, but yes, you can parody things. People maybe take that too far or don't understand it well enough in the content creator space, but you can absolutely parody things.
Yeah, and see, that was one thing I was pointing out before too, is a lot of the stuff that some people are already planning on doing with the whole Steamboat Willie thing would be protected under parody anyway. And I think you hit the other point that I think we're going to jump to next, and then we're going to get into some super chats and see what the audience has to ask you and say. But it is basically, no, I just lost my train of thought. beyond the parody point, it was something else. But anyway, anybody else have anything to ask or say before we get to some other points on this?
I think we can get to the super chats and the audience questions.
Yeah, maybe I'll remember what it was I was going to say. So let's hit a few of these now. We're going to bounce around a little bit. We're going to try and grab ones that are more specific to this first, and then we'll come back around. But I just got to say, from Dear Owan, who sent in 50 euros. Holy crap! Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dear Owan.
Says, finally caught you live. Happy New Year, Midnight's Edge Gang, and congratulations on all the milestones. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. I'm glad to have you here for it.
Absolutely. And then this one says, the last millennial with $4.99. Can Script Tom, someone explain how Apple has all the TV shows you can buy digitally? What's the process? Can an IP holder take off Apple anytime? Well, basically, they have a license to sell those, right?
Right.
Script is my understanding. So, yeah.
Yeah,
That's right. They have a distribution contract.
Yeah,
It's
no
a
different
distribution
from
contract.
Amazon.
Unless there's some sort of exclusivity clause in the contract, then yeah, Apple can buy any license they want to, any movie or television show they want to distribute to their clients.
As long as they got a sanity clause.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's see here what else we got. Jaeger sends in $10. Thank you so much. Says, trademarks based on IP should not be valid after they hit public domain. Otherwise, it's just open door for lawfare to extort control of public IP after the fact. Yeah, and that's kind of what we were just getting here to. And I know you sent this in a while before we got to that point. But yeah, I think that's something that's valid in this point, or in this case, and I think is worth it for at least one or two people to try and push it, maybe to see how far we can get with this and see where the law should land on this. Because unfortunately, until there's precedent set, right, Rick, that there's not much you can really go off of. And we're not, I mean, of course, we're not giving any kind of legal advice here, but
right.
The
Right.
powerful have friends in power, and they will always win. Like,
I'm not sure they will always win, but they can always make your life pretty troublesome before they don't win, if they don't.
And yeah. I'm not going to use the vast money I'm making from my YouTube channel to challenge this. I'm just trying to tell the audience out there.
No, but I tend to agree with this, right? I mean, this is what we were talking about with respect to the mutant copyright law concept, right? There have been courts that have said if you try to take a copyrighted character that hits the public domain and make them a trademark, you're kind of obviating what the copyright law actually says. That's going to be a problem for us in the courts. And so we don't know exactly how that would go. Disney may press it. Disney might not, because that precedent is one that they don't want to set, right? The copyright owners don't want to be told by the courts that doesn't work. They want it to be a gray area to some extent. And so I tend to agree that using it in that fashion, specifically to try to protect public domain works, is outside the spirit of the law, even if it might fit within some of the black letter precedent of the law.
right.
Yeah, and those of us who are into gaming and the old Nintendo games are pissed off that the games don't exist, they're not sold anymore, the platforms don't work anymore or whatever, and we can't keep playing them. I mean, this in the game area, we're not even talking about trademarks. We know that Nintendo and Sony own these games,
Right.
but if you're not making them available, then why can't we use a ROM and play it on a some kind of hacked service? I mean, that's a different subject. I'm sorry.
It's an interesting subject, though. Actually, I want to hear the answer to that. Since you brought it up, I'm actually, as a retro gamer myself, and since you brought us into that sidetrack, what is the legality of, for instance, hacking? Let's just say like a Sega Genesis Mini or something. What's the legality of hacking that and then putting ROMs of other games that, for instance, Sega no longer has the license to, like Quackshot, for instance, but which you just so happen to own and have bought the license to use for personal use for? What's the legalities around that?
Sure. So this gets very complicated, but I'm always happy to talk about gaming. So emulators, the emulation of a system, is generally thought under the law by most of the precedents that we know of at this point to be legal. The use of the ROMs as a direct copyright infringement is probably where you run into a stumbling block there. And unlike what you might see on Twitch or YouTube, just holding up the fact that you own the cartridge doesn't necessarily mean that you're acting under the color of law by making a ROM, right? Because when we talk about copyright, we talk about the right to distribute, the right to display, the right to publicly display, the right to perform, these various things that are the exclusive province of the copyright holder. And that includes the right to reproduce. That's what copy is in copyright. And so you probably don't have the legal right to take even the game that you own and to rip it or put it in another format to use on your emulator. And that creates a problem, obviously, for games preservation and folks that want to play things that aren't made available by these companies. The companies have that exclusive right. They retain that exclusive right for the 95 years we've talked about here, and have the ability to say that you shouldn't have the right to do that because there is a possible market that they could otherwise exploit using the copyrights that they own by making it available. Now, whether they choose to do that or not is an open question, but usually in following gaming, what you'll see is somebody will make a fan project of Metroid and try to bring it back, or they will try to restore something that is not otherwise available for folks, like Simpsons Hit and Run, whatever it might be. And when it gets close in time to when the actual copyright holder is likely to market their revival, they'll cut off the project at that point. So I certainly understand this. There's a lot of games that I used to play that I don't have access to in any kind of easy format. I believe the industry should probably do a better job of making those older games accessible to the modern consoles or the modern PCs. But from a copyright perspective, the legal answer is those copyright holders still have the exclusive right to determine how their owned products are distributed to the marketplace. And so that's why you have issues with the ROMs. But the overall emulation is actually going to be mostly okay. There are probably some exceptions to how it is done, whether or not it was created in a white box environment and these various things.
Right. That's the key, is that it has to be, you have to document that you created it in a white box.
Yeah, I mean, so there are aspects of the fact pattern that determine whether a given emulator is okay, but overall, the concept of creating that is going to be a legal concept broadly. It's the ROMs that become a bigger problem.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be something that's probably going to be settled in the same way like music rights kind of.
And to me, quite frankly, this is a bigger issue than all the Mickey Mouse stuff with regards to Steamboat Willie, because the games are fun, like, and we want to play them.
And there's a preservation aspect to this too, Paul, and I totally understand.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I mean, if Nintendo's no longer going to distribute a specific game, why can't we use a hacked ROM?
And I feel the same way about TV shows and movies and music as well. So like it's a gray area, and the big difference here, and I thought that was an interesting point you brought up. I think it was you, Rick, who brought it up earlier about the whole, we've never really ventured into the waters of digital reproduction before, because before the whole idea was every form you had outside of, say, books, I guess, maybe, because I mean, books kind of like a 1-for-1 copy or whatever you want to call it, of whatever it is you're trying to put out there. But like in most cases, every other derivative or other version of whatever media was being put out there, there's still what was called a master, right? You'd have a master recording. You'd have the film negative. You'd have certain things that were basically, if you own them and had them, that was part of the factor that made it. It was like, this is mine because I have the original master of this. I'm the one who can make the derivative works of this, and all other derivative works that are, say, bootlegs or whatever, they're going to clearly look lesser than the official ones. And that's kind of the whole point of preserving your own copyright and owning the things you own and stuff of that sort. So again, I'm curious how, you know, when people aren't even preserving the original negatives anymore, or when you have a digital age where the digital versions are better than some of the negatives in this case now. I mean, where do we go from here? That's an interesting point you brought up earlier.
Yeah, and you see that with video games. Certainly, you've got stories of companies that can't find the assets that they use to create it, right? So we got, like, I think Final Fantasy VII had a project where they couldn't find all the backgrounds they used. So they had to kind of try to recreate them.
Diablo 1.
Yeah. So I mean, that's not great. I don't love any of that. And I would see copyright law and intellectual property law kind of try to get up with the times on these various things. But like that's not necessarily my job on this stuff, right? So I get clients that sit across the desk from me that say, well, why is it that way? And I can try to explain it, But a lot of this stuff is accidents of history. A lot of this stuff is just not anticipating being able to make essentially one-for-one copies of things at an infinite basis. And so I think there are changes that need to be made. I would love it for our legislatures around the world to take a look at what the digital economy really means for copyright and intellectual property protection, and perhaps create a more balanced solution for things like public domain and takedowns and how creation happens on the internet, as well as on ownership of things that are not otherwise technologically available, like video games.
Well, I think streaming has exacerbated this, because you could literally have bought a video from some company and then they lose the right to sell it, and then suddenly you can't stream it from them anymore. What's the goddamn law on that? Like, I bought the bloody video from Amazon. I could stream it whenever I wanted, and then it's gone and I can't stream it anymore. What the fuck?
Well, they actually went to court already over that.
In gaming, even, for instance, say that you bought like Sonic 1, 2, or Sonic CD on a bunch of digital platforms, boom, gone just before the recent Sonic compilation.
And I'm happy to say I have episodes on that on Virtual Legality. We just saw Sony lose the rights to certain of its Discovery Channel videos that people that bought through the Sony store can't get access to after a point in time. And the answer to that is that the contracts for buying digital access to things like movies and TV shows and video games to some extent all have conceptually within them that you only have access so long as we have access to distribute it to you. And so there's a certain amount of trust and dependence on the storefront holder, the platform holder, to have entered into the appropriate contracts to continue to have the right to distribute, even if something falls apart with that relationship, that we're seeing kind of have certain broadside hits, a sinking ship on some of this stuff that we can only hope creates enough kind of Sturm und Drang to get people concerned about this, so that the Amazons and the Voodoos and the Sonys and the Microsofts of the world know that they have to enter into contracts that give them enough rights to make sure that people don't lose access to what they've purchased. But contractually, and again, a United States lawyer here, the United States takes the approach generally for most jurisdictions, not all, that contracts are to be given the most power that we can, that they're to be read as if both sides agreed to all their terms in a good faith and fair dealings kind of standpoint. The contracts themselves say things like, when we put the buy button there, it doesn't mean buy, it means license perpetually.
Yep.
And right now, I think there are things that could be corrected on that, but that's the state of the world right this second.
We sadly already have way too large.
Right. We already have precedent set for this, unfortunately, Paul, and that was they tried to sue Amazon over this and lost. And basically everything Rick said, and I'm sure that was probably one of the ones you come across in your studies of this subject, because as we've pointed out time and time again, and we tried to warn people, they are basically, you're long-term leasing these things, and that's only as long as you said, they have the license through the companies to have these things. And we've already seen some of these video on demand services go belly up and merge with other ones, and people have lost a lot of movies.
Well, I mean, I don't care. I don't care if that title is no longer visually saleable, but somewhere on their servers, they need to be keeping it so I can watch it again.
And that's what Rick was saying. They need to be able to work that into their contract, and that's part of the goodwill aspect of what and I agree with it, but that's where the muddy waters comes in. And it's like, if they can't legally do anything about it, they can't legally do anything about it. And we're at the mercy of what the contract says. And, it just is what it is. And it's like, I used to point out to people that technically back in the day when VHS and beta first came out, it was set up to where if the studio decided they wanted to come and take those tapes away from you at any time, they could. That's basically what that law kind of said. But that didn't really hold water in court, in law, because once you purchase something and have the physical ownership of it in the privacy of the home, Privacy Copyright Acts and all those things that we discussed earlier about making your own copies of things that are kind of the same thing with video games, could be applied there too. You run into this idea of, no, wait, people need to be able to privately do whatever the fuck they want with what they have, right? Like if I have the book sitting on my shelf, and if I want to cut pages out of my own book, there's no law that says I can't do that, right? Same thing with a videotape. Just because you own the movie that's on that videotape, you don't own that movie, right? Or you don't own that videotape. But now what we do with that movie at our own home, in the privacy of our own home, as long as we're not making any money off it, there's nothing the studio can do about it now. See, that was what they tried to pull on us at the beginning too. Because the studios, make no mistake about it, As long as they can control whatever it is you're fucking watching, they will. And they will continue
Studios
to do
are
so.
our friends.
Bullshit.
Stop
We've
it,
seen streaming
Tom.
services do that, right? We've seen them pull episodes of certain shows. We've seen edits happen. We've seen disclaimers be added to various movies and shows. And so that what you describe is very similar to the intellectual property notion of the first sale doctrine, which is one of the things I would see added to the digital landscape of some kind of new copyright act, which is to say exactly what you said, right? You can own a book on your shelf behind me in your library. And while that is copyrighted material, right, that's material owned by the author and the publisher, that doesn't mean that you can't write in it. Doesn't mean that you can't resell that book or lend it to a friend, even though the copyright holder has the exclusive right to distribution. In the digital landscape, you won't be able to do that because you can't control for infinite reproductions of these things. And right now we don't have a first sale kind of doctrine for digital goods. That first sale is specifically physical manifestations of copyrighted material, a book, a record, whatever it might be. And so that needs to be rethought at a legal level, but that's not the case right now.
Thank you for reinterpreting exactly what I was trying to say, Rick, because that's just it. They own what's in that book. They own what's on that videotape. They own what's on that DVD. But once you own that in your home, they can't do shit about it. Like you said, you can transfer that to a friend, no problem legally, as long as you're not trying to distribute on mass level and make a profit off of something. There's nothing that really the studio can do to you. But in this case, they have complete control. They have you by the short and curlies when it comes to this stuff. So if they decide they're going to yank, they're going to yank, and you're going to feel it. And it's just tough shit, right? At the end of the day, and until something changes, which is not going to change, because I think there's already been precedent set with the Amazon case, that going forward, they're just going to throw their hands up and you go, well, sorry, we lost the license. You don't have it anymore.
As long as I don't have to pay for the yanking, I'm fine.
Well, you do.
I think you might have some success getting increased disclosure at the point of sale.
Right.
I know the buy button.
The best it'll get.
The buy button kind of aspect of these lawsuits hasn't been fully litigated at this point, but I do think that even though as a lawyer I can say, yeah, you're buying a perpetual license, that makes sense to me as a corporate attorney. I don't think that makes sense, or what people think is happening when you hit the buy button on Vudu or the PlayStation Network or the Microsoft Store or whatever. Buy is buy and purchase is purchase, right? And so I think you might get some disclosure and better knowledge in the marketplace, the people that are actually being looked at to hit this button, if you had more kind of clarity in what is actually happening. Perpetual license, maybe some other way to say it that the corporations might like a little bit better. But when you get that higher level of information, I think you would see a certain amount of reduction in pricing. People reacting to the fact that it's not a purchase might be a little bit more obvious. And you'd have some effects on the downstream kind of economics of the whole situation, which I think would be good, right? I think people should be pricing in when you buy the Mythbusters episode you really love from this particular streaming service that it might go away someday, right? Like that should be priced into your value proposition.
People won't want that.
People won't want that. I mean, people will pay less. Does that go from $2?
I don't think they. Well, I mean, then suddenly it's a rental.
Well, I mean, I don't know how people will react to that. I don't think the corporations know how people will react to that.
Oh, they do. I think they love the word buy. I think they love the implication of that. And I think we don't need explanation as to what your limitations are. I think the public wants to be able to have access to that movie or television series in perpetuity. However, the streaming companies, however, the license holders have to give us that. That is our only expectation. We don't need any weird language around that this is a 3-year rental or something. I mean,
sadly, Paul, that's not what we want, but that's what we got, unfortunately.
That's what I would say is that's the situation.
Yeah.
And so I'd see greater transparency if I could on all of this.
Well, that's
stuff,
better than
people
nothing.
Understood it better.
Sure.
And I don't think that even came out of the Amazon case, sadly. That's the problem here. Because at the end of the day, even when Sony was going through their issues here recently, I think the most people got out of them was, I don't even think they got any like refunds or anything like that. I can't remember what it was they got out of them.
I mean, and licensing clarification, people don't even read the instructions on how to work their microwave. I mean,
I know, but that's not the company's fault, unfortunately, Paul. And I know where you're coming from, and I agree with you.
Weapon.
It is, and that's where I think I agree with Rick, and I agree with you too, Paul, on both ends here. In that I mean, he's just coming from the aspect of this is what the law is now.
Oh,
And this
no,
is what
I
we
know.
have. But like, yeah, I agree with you. There should be more transparency in this. I think less people would, in fact, I think a hell of a lot of people would be a lot less likely to buy more or quote unquote buy digital things if they
Yeah.
realize this.
Yeah,
You
I
know who
agree,
would
which is why
really
they don't want to
win
have
if
that clarification on.
if there was like more transparency and clarity? The pirates, because then we'd be like, hey, you know what? We can actually offer things in perpetuity like these guys can't, the legal ones. Those are the ones who actually would win on the increased clarity. Because I agree completely with all of you guys. This is a situation that we have. Consumers don't want it, but they were given it to them, even though from the point of view of each consumer, they probably all think, okay, this right stuff, that's a you problem. I just want access to the movie I bought forever.
That's
Oh,
my
I
point.
can't have that. Well, there's some piracy stuff right over here that's going to give me that. Can you compete with that? Oh, okay, good to know. That's the real reality.
And for the most part, Paul, like Amazon and a few services have done exactly what you're saying. So I'm not going to say they haven't at least made that effort. Like there's stuff that I've bought that you can't buy anymore that I still have access to, but other people can't buy it now. You know what I mean? So they lost the license to sell it.
You have special Amazon.
No,
I didn't know that.
No, but what it is I bought it so long ago that I had it then. They still have it on their server. They have a license to have it there for people who bought it, like you said, Paul, but they can't sell it legally to anybody new now. Right. So
right. And that's what we saw in gaming
yeah.
for a while, right? You'd have somebody lose the music rights or something and it would be in your Steam library, but Steam wouldn't be selling it anymore. And I think that's how people thought things would generally go. And that's how they've mostly gone, especially in gaming. Gaming's done an okay job at this. But movie and television, with stuff coming off of streaming, we've seen it with kind of like the tax issues with your HBO Maxes and whatnot, and Disney Plus, and now with things like Sony losing the rights to certain of the things that people have bought. I think it's a problem. But here's what I object to primarily, right? So I pulled up on my screen the PlayStation Network terms of service. The PlayStation Network terms of service, which has a buy button when you purchase something from them, whether it's a movie, a TV show, or a video game. And then in section 10.1, like 3/4 of the way down the terms of service, has the sentence, use of the terms own, ownership, purchase, sale, sold, sell, rent, or buy in this agreement or in connection with content does not mean or imply any transfer of ownership of any content, data, or software. I mean, I get what you're doing, Sony, from a legal perspective. This all checks out from a contract kind of reading standpoint, but I don't think that it's fair to the people that are rolling in to buy Mortal Kombat and they hit the buy button and they think it's theirs forever.
You pretty much have to have the type of education you have to understand that, though, Rick. That's the problem. Like, well, no, most normal people are going to look at that and just go, I just want my fucking thing I paid for, man. Like, as Paul was saying, right?
It's done in very plain language, but it's hidden amongst a whole lot of reading that they know the customer doesn't want to do. It's basically circumventing the idea of false advertising by saying, you can buy this, but in the fine print, we're not really telling you can buy it.
It means license, like Rick said. Yeah.
It's a license. Yeah. I mean, it's not very, I would say ethically, it's not good practice, but legally it's fine.
Yeah, no, and that's
legally,
what I was saying before.
It's touch and go, right? So legally, you'd have to get it up to a court, and a court would have to say, "Hey, look, you can't bury that kind of stuff." And the buy button is pretty close to false advertising if it's not actually false advertising, because a reasonable person, which is not a lawyer, right? A lawyer is not a reasonable person for purposes of a courtroom. A reasonable person would look at this and think it was something different. And I think, kind of ironically, the more we have these conversations, which I want to have this information out there. It actually makes the market a little bit more knowledgeable of these things and maybe has that argument be less of a chance of success. But I think the average person doesn't contemplate any of this going on in the fine print or the terms and conditions or otherwise. And that's one of the reasons virtual legality on my channel exists, right? I wanted to have these conversations because I'm reading and writing these things all the time. And I want to talk about how this operates in fact. And yes, I agree. I would love it if it were perpetual. The problem with that, from a perspective of a storefront, a service provider, is that they can only convey what they have the rights to, right? So there's always got to be a background, right? A distribution agreement, whatever it is, that comes from Discovery or Warner Brothers or Studio Canal or whatever issues people have had on these various platforms. And if that fails, they're not going to have the right to distribute it if their contract isn't written in an appropriate fashion for this. So we want there to be the consternation of losing the rights. We want to have these conversations, but we want the best place for this to really be changed is at that buy button level, and to make sure that the storefronts know that this is important to people and that they should be entering into licenses that even if Warner Brothers goes through a merger and gets a new CEO and decides they don't even want to license this out to us anymore, they want to charge $1 billion for it, that if we lose the rights, we can still distribute it to the people that paid us money for it.
That would be like having a chain of ownership option when, if you're on Amazon and you want to watch a Warner Brothers film that Amazon has lost the rights to, it would direct you to the Warner Brothers site where you can access it based on your account information that you had at Amazon and proof of sale at the time, right?
Well, that would be cool.
That would be an easier way to do it. And then if the rights went back to Amazon, you can still go back into your Amazon account and access it, because you have the purchase history is basically your digital receipt of where you can access it from wherever it has been distributed, so long as you're able to get it from the very source of the rights holders initially, I suppose. I'm just spitballing here an idea to solve that.
Yeah, no, and you see some of that kind of in practice with like a Movies Anywhere approach. Or formerly Ultraviolet, right? Which has the kind of studios agree that we're going to acknowledge all of these various platforms, and you're only going to have to buy whatever it is you're buying, Cabin in the Woods, once, and then it'll show up on your Amazon and your iTunes and your Vudu and things like that. It could work better, but it's certainly the kind of thing that I think people should be seeking, right? It's the kind of thing that the market should be demanding, because you don't want to just have it die on one platform or another when you're depending on all of these tech companies to get everything right. And I'm not saying anything on a nefarious basis for Sony or Amazon or anybody else that's dealing with these things. It's just that some of these contracts were entered into before anybody had even given this full thought, right? So the same kind of stuff that you saw with kind of the early Netflix shows, or shows coming to Netflix that maybe didn't have the music rights to display that audiovisual combination on a streaming service because they weren't really thought of before this all happened. And you had those changes, which have happened less and less when the contracts have gotten tightened up. We can hope for those contracts to continue to be tightened up behind the scenes. But every time something like the Discovery stuff happens at Sony, I think it's a problem for the digital landscape overall, because people will be more reluctant to enter into it in the first place.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this pans out in the next few years here, because, the last millennial sends in 499 says, also Scripps said create an LLC to distribute Bond movie in the U.S. Do movie companies need to create an LLC entity to show movies in other countries? That's a good question.
Every time you make a movie or television show, you have to create an LLC. And if you are planning to distribute it into other countries, you have to negotiate with those other countries with your initial LLC, and possibly have to create another LLC domestically in order to facilitate distribution.
The lawyers always win.
Yeah, and the lawyers always win.
Yeah. ActionCom sends in $20. Thank you so much. Says, I can't help but think of California versus Greenwood, which made garbage searches warrantless because there was no expectation of privacy. Now that Disney is throwing away Steamboat Willie, how can they expect protection? Well, they haven't thrown it away.
This is very much against Disney's will.
Yes.
Yeah, this is against their will. And again,
but what about Willow? Same question, but that was something that was released, and then they threw it away. Or rather, they took it off the service and asked for a tax refund. Isn't that the same thing as throwing it away?
That is a little bit better argument, yeah.
The Willow stuff, the stuff that's being ripped from the services is interesting. I honestly think that's mostly a tax law problem. But yes, certainly from the standpoint of somebody that wants to have access to those things. I know my kids watched a Disney Plus show. I can't remember. It's like an Academy or something that got pulled down. That they were very unhappy about. I think that is a problem, both for the preservation things we talked about with respect to games, and for people that just like to enjoy art. However you might feel about the Willow series, it was something that was created by artists. And so I think that you could maybe have a better argument for wanting to get access to that. The law doesn't provide you with that right? That is still something Disney spent money to create. It's still theirs.
It's still theirs, but it's the only time they actually erase something from the canon of an IP. So Willow is still pure in that regard.
There's a few things they pulled down, actually.
Yeah, no, but
and
but think of it this way. A lot of people said, "Oh, we don't want the sequel trilogy anymore. Erase it, remake it." Well, they did that technically with Willow. They erased that Disney Plus series, and if they wanted to remake another Willow Disney Plus series, that would be the canon going forward, unless it too, of course, failed, and then they would, tax write off that as well and try again a few years down the road. Willow is still kind of pure as a result of that, because they themselves, the company themselves, have acknowledged this failed, and we do not want to acknowledge it anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So that is trash by
Yeah.
Disney. But Steamboat Willie is not.
Yeah, exactly.
Action
But
does
does that make it okay to download illegally Willow then? Because it's not legally available because this.
Yeah, the lawyer's not going to ever say it's okay to download something illegally.
But if you
I leave it to your own ethics on these things.
I was going to say by law, no, it's
fine,
not legal,
okay.
but
fine by law. No.
I like how Rick put it. Ethically,
I would believe it at that.
Ethically, I think there's an argument to be made there. And this is where I get into my point earlier about preservation of things. And like you said before, where they don't even have the access to certain things anymore, as far as like backgrounds and other things like that. It's the same damn thing in music and movies. It's like we learn every day about more that was lost in that Universal fire like 10 years ago. And it was a lot. And you'd be surprised. So ActionCom, though, here brings up an interesting point with $5. Says, is there any overlap between Disney copyright issue and what happened with Napster? No, I don't see that being an issue. But now what we're talking about as far as the digital stuff, maybe so a little bit more, because that has more to do with piracy and the access to it. And like, it actually has more overlap with like the emulator thing that Rick and Paul were talking about, to where Napster itself, the program, is basically like an emulator. What it uses is up to the proprietor, and that's where it kind of found itself in some gray, muddy area legally because of what it was able to do with what it can do, what it was, basically.
Yeah.
But I'm sure the techie guys can explain it better than me.
Well, I would caution everybody with respect to music and intellectual property. Music is almost its own universe in terms of different licenses, statutory licenses, various other things that happen even above and beyond just copyright and trademark and patent. So the answer, I think, is no, not exactly, but the law is always slow on tech, and even the things that Napster tried to do and some other things try to do across other media, which is to create a separate copy of something that never exists in two places at once and tries to solve some of the copyright issues, have been looked upon askance negatively by the courts. So you never know what's actually going to work for a judge on tech questions, because frankly, judges, like our legislature, are not always the best position to understand tech questions the best.
Oh, really? and
I'm trying to be gentle.
And politicians aren't either. There's nothing funnier than a Senate or congressional hearing on something even vaguely technical and listening to these 110-year-old men ask these questions.
I've jokingly said, almost only kind of jokingly, that the Night Trap and Mortal Kombat Senate hearings in the 90s made a lawyer out of me. That was one of those where I said they are completely wrong at what video games even are.
Oh, they have no idea. And yeah. Now the Napster thing is interesting, because the trap Napster actually was because it was people sent their music files to a centrally located server, and that was Napster's downfall, which is why torrent can kind of get away with things, because it's your, in theory, owned product and you're sharing it with someone. Now, the fact you're sharing it with tens of thousands of people, that's a different issue. But you are allowed to share a piece of music with a friend if you own that track from your CD. So that's how torrent got around the problem that Napster got into, because you actually had to put a copy of the thing that you owned on a different server that you did not own. So anyway.
Yeah, and I think anytime you can kind of diffuse the liability, you're going to have a better chance of success than centralized liability.
But you know what? You got to love the ingenuity of the nerds the geeks and nerds out there.
Oh, yeah.
Who are trying to just, get around all this shit. And I don't agree necessarily what they're doing, but I mean, I think it's a game of, whack the mole, and no matter how smart you make the law, the people you're trying to outsmart are always smarter than you.
Yeah, you don't want to make it so narrow that it never applies. You also don't want to make it so broad that it applies to everyone. So
Correct.
writing laws is hard. I'm not going to tell you it's not.
We have too many laws.
They could be improved.
Well, they have to be made up as we go along because we have some creative people that like to do stuff to other people.
Yes.
It's humans all the way down.
Yep.
But as Lao Tse said, for every law we enact, we love each other less.
All right, let's see here what else we have on this particular subject, and then we can move off of this one. Let's see here. Pinochet's helicopter tours been a member for 29 months and says it will never be wrong to press the boundaries or face corporations to take action or waste money. Corporations must know their place. And yeah, until somebody does do something, we're not going to know the answers to these. And that's the problem that I think Rick is having this morning is till there's some kind of precedent set, you really have no basis to draw from.
Well, I can say certain things definitively, like
right.
Steamboat Willie's in the public domain, but how you use it from there is facts and circumstances based, as the lawyers like to say.
And that's what you're going to get the porn version, Steamboat's Willie.
Well,
which falls under parody. See, that's the thing. Yeah,
it falls under
depending
parody
on how bad the sex is.
I really don't want to see how he stuffs that cow so it can get on the hoist.
Oh, I get
familiar with Steamboat Willie.
A furry porn. There we go.
Sorry, Richard.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, that is parody. And the further you can get away from what Disney would create, the weaker the trademark argument, certainly. And so there are reasons to potentially go that direction if that's what floats your boat. No pun intended. But yeah, I think law is always a murky area, copyright more than most areas. And so I think people often come to me and say, yeah, well, can't you say this or yes or no on this? And unfortunately, I can only kind of advise as to where the law is likely to wind up and how uses are probably going to happen. But you still got actors out in the real world like Disney that's willing to send that letter and potentially send a lawsuit.
Well, and the thing too, just in people can sue you for anything, anytime. They just pay the $75 for the writ, and then you got to deal with it. Like I've been sued for the dumbest things. You can't stop people from suing you over anything. Then you got that period
absolutely.
Where they try to figure out whether it's actually a valid thing. But I mean, that could be years of your time. I mean, that's a crazy, crazy world.
No, that's absolutely true. I think I have a thumbnail out there from one of my videos that was anybody can sue you for anything.
For anything.
And that's the truth, right? It costs very little to actually file a lawsuit.
Correct.
And whether or not you have the right side of the argument at the end of the day isn't going to prevent you from having a bad time.
Right.
Because that's cost, expense, and it's stress.
Yep.
Right? Nobody wants to be in a lawsuit.
Nope.
All right. Well, moving on here, we got a Rumble rant from the Rumble side of things. So hello to those watching us over on Rumble. That's right. We're simulcasting. Wesley 1924 sent in $5 on the Rumble side and says, is there any legal liability for YouTube to just not take down the videos and say, you all need to fight it out in court instead of them deciding? Well, that's kind of already built into the system, Wesley.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because that's what the DMCA does, right? So I think the real question is there any liability that YouTube has for hosting a video that's infringing? And while you might think that that's an answered question, it isn't really. There's cases in the 90s, the Prodigy cases, that talk about these platforms having liability as contributory infringers by essentially allowing infringements to exist on their platforms. And what the DMCA comes in and says is, hey, as long as you don't have positive knowledge about infringement, you can host these things without worrying about being sued. And if you get notice that there is infringement, you take it down immediately, no questions asked. You can't get sued for that contributory infringement kind of concept. But we didn't really litigate out whether or not there was actual liability there all the way in the 90s before the DMCA came in. And so YouTube and every other platform's default stance is, okay, if we get a notice, it's coming down. We're not making legal determinations.
Right.
You tell us it's in the public domain, we don't care. We don't have liability if we take it down. We have potential liability if we don't. We're going to take it down.
Right. And that's kind of what I was saying is kind of built in there already to where you can fight it, but then you get to a point and it basically says, you're going to have to take it to court. We're done.
Right. And the DMCA says you can say, no, that's an invalid takedown. And then they have to put it back up, although they don't really have to put it back up, as we talked about, because there's no liability for taking it down and not putting it back up. So they're supposed to put it back
Right.
up and then tell the original claimant, send us your lawsuit and we'll take it back down. But if you don't choose to go that route, we don't have to do anything for you, and we're still not liable for anything.
Yep.
And so it was written in the 90s. It wasn't really written for entirely the purposes it's primarily used for now. So it could get another look as well. The balance is kind of off between whether or not people can abuse that takedown request system and still make trouble for people, especially in YouTube and content generation in general now, which is so kind of news-based and streaming live and things. If you get a takedown and it comes back in 14 days, it's maybe not that useful to running a channel in certain respects. And so that's the kind of thing that could change. But in answer to the question, is there any legal liability to just not take down videos? There's possible legal liability there if there's an infringing video that they get notice of and that they don't take down. And every corporation on earth is going to say no liability is better than possible liability.
Yep.
Correct.
Exactly. So yeah, you're kind of at the, they're just kind of like, they just kind of stay out of it at that point.
And that's Congress, right? Congress put that incentive structure in front of them, and that could maybe be done a little bit better.
And I think Pilgrim Media points it out pretty well with his $2 super chat here. Disney has no problem torturing you in court. No,
Or
they
even
won't.
even on TV.
No, no, they'll do it for years if they think they can just.
No, I'm just talking about the product they're creating.
Oh well, yeah.
They get you in the
but enough
home,
about
and then they'll get you in
Daredevil.
the courts.
Yeah. And then Hollywood Apocalypse sends in 14 South African rand, says, where do fan film and fan edits fall, and where's the line? Well, this is an interesting question because these technically do fall into what would be considered copyright infringement. The difference is most studios and IP holders in the past have decided not to necessarily go after these because usually A, they're made by fans, so it doesn't look good, and B, most of the time, now I say most of the time, they don't make any kind of profit off of this kind of fan film type thing. Now, when you have an Alec Peters type situation, that's when things get dicey. And because of that specific situation, going forward, a lot of the studios have been a little bit less friendly with the fan film community. Now, I'm curious what Rick or anybody else has anything to say about this, but yeah, basically, as Script and I have pointed out many times, though, when it comes to fan films, 9 times out of 10, all you're doing is basically spending a lot of money for a fancy home video for your friends.
Yep.
And to market an intellectual property for the intellectual property owner.
Yeah.
Which is why CBS loved the Star Trek fan films, because it kept Star Trek still in the conversation. But the moment a certain party decided to sell privately made Star Trek IP products to their backers, that's when they had to draw the line. And that ended up really damaging the fan film brand that Paramount, Viacom, CBS was actually very supportive of.
Yeah, and I'm happy to say I've talked about this in respect of fan games in virtual legality on my channel. You can find those videos there. But in short, it's what I generally call on my channel largesse, right? So we talked about the fact that a copyright holder or a trademark holder doesn't have to pursue an action against someone. Trademark's a little bit different than copyright because if you get a trademark diluted enough, then they actually lose the legal protection. So you'll see trademarks kind of fought over a little bit more. But a copyright holder can just allow an infringement, and that doesn't reduce their ability to enforce the copyright on the next person or a different person if that person says something they don't like. So we see this throughout video games, right? I think Twitch and streaming in general is one of these largest areas where most of the licenses that you enter into to play a video game say it's for personal use only. You can't commercialize the playing of this game, all these things in the terms and conditions or the fine print or whatever you want to call them. And yet you see those same games being played on Twitch or otherwise enjoyed by people. Why? Because for the most part, studios have come to the understanding that it's good advertisement for their game, right? You have the Among Us situation, you have various other games that have had success being advertised in that way with popular streamers or sometimes not so popular streamers. But it's a problem for those content creators because the contracts for the most part, and this is a little bit different now than when I started the channel, but the contracts for the most part don't kind of make that separate statement that you can stream this and make some money through ads. There are exceptions to that. Minecraft, most notably, has a license that says go nuts for the most part. But most of these licenses don't allow that. And so you're basically saying, studio, I'm going to make money this way. I'm going to do this thing because I love it. and I'm gonna put a video up on Twitch, or I'm gonna make a fan version of Sonic the Hedgehog, or whatever it's going to be. And those studios, as long as you're swimming in the same direction as them, as long as they think you're benefiting them, they're probably going to let it go. And certainly in gaming, a certain culture has developed around not liking it when Nintendo or Atlas or whomever, mostly Japanese companies, say, no, you're not allowed to put this up because, hey, we made a story-based game and we don't want the twists to be all out there on Twitch or whatever it might be. That gaming, at least in the United States, generally looks askance at that, looks badly at that happening. And so these studios have also been kind of culturally told not to take these actions using the full extent of their copyright, and that's totally okay. It puts the streamers in a bad position. It potentially puts fan game makers, fan film makers in a bad position. But as long as you are seen as an asset to the copyright holder, you're probably going to be okay. The problem there is the moment you're not okay, right? So I've done videos on my channel that talk about like a Twitch streamer that said something bad about Electronic Arts that happened to do FIFA streams for the most part. And Electronic Arts said, oh, that's infringement. That's all infringement. You're struck. Your channel's dead. Go away. And people said, is that allowed? And I said, well, yes, they're all acting kind of on this notion that it's hanging over their shoulder that the studio could do whatever they want, which creates a problem both for the streams and it creates a problem for like the accuracy of the information you can assume to be taking from those folks, right? Once you realize that people have to step on eggshells a little bit with respect to offending publishers or studios or what have you, I think you think of it differently. Certainly the way that the laws are written when we talk about disclosures for sponsorships and things like that, it's just that when you have some level of beholdenness to another party, disclosing that's important to your audience because, well, it changes the way that you treat what it is that you think about these things. So it's all part of the same mixed bag. You can make a fan game, be careful about it. Certainly, I wouldn't recommend trying to sell access to it. That isn't the be all end all, right? It's not like a bright line. If you sell it, you're infringing. If you're not, you're not. But be careful with those things. Seek counsel before you engage in any kind of fan project. Generally speaking, you probably have a lawyer that's nerdy enough or interested enough in whatever topic you're going to address to talk to you about it on a fairly equitable basis. I can't speak for all of my profession, but there are nice ones out there, I promise. Talk to counsel about what lines you can cross and know what risks you're taking when you do it, right? Because the thing I hate is people that invest all their time, maybe their money into something, and then they get almost to the finish line and some video game studio, some movie studio cuts them off.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a great, very well put, Rick. And I don't want to like discourage anybody from doing anything, but look, if you have the drive to do something and you think you have a great idea, I don't know, I think you may have given this advice before, Script. I know I have. If somebody comes up to me and tells me I got this great idea for fan film and they tell me this great idea, I'd be like, that's great. Now what you should do is not make it Star Wars or not make it Star Trek or not make it this thing and make it its own thing and try to work with it that way. Cause then you actually have something here because it's worth you spending your time, money, and effort on that and maybe getting then you will get some notice maybe from the studios, as opposed to if you're putting a fan film out there, then that's especially nowadays, chances are they're just not going to. The last thing you want is their attention.
Blacklist you.
Yeah.
Blacklist you.
Not just that, but if you're looking for work, the copyright holders have a very different set concept of ownership and quality when it comes to their own property.
Right.
Back in the days when you were writing spec scripts to try to become a sitcom writer, you would send a Golden Girls script to Frasier. You would never send a Frasier script to Frasier. Right? That's really the key. They just so the same thing happens, from this creative perspective, and they're right. Don't spend, your grandparents' inheritance on doing a remake of somebody else's IP. Take that idea of yours and make it your own. I mean, this is the dumbest thing in the world. We know you love Spock. We absolutely know you do. But come up with your own, like Spick. Although that's racist.
I do. That was not a good one.
That's true.
We'll have that last remark stricken from the record.
So it's okay.
That was not intentional.
I'm all in my law speak today. Pinochet's helicopter tour sends in $2. Says, "Hi, Hogue. It was FF8 that lost their assets for."
Okay, I got the wrong Final Fantasy, but I knew it happened.
Hey, nerds are going to do that. Actually.
And I'd rather be informed.
Aren't
lawyers like some of the original nerds, though?
The people who have the buy button should actually change their disclaimer saying it's actually not a buy button. It's a BUE button. So we're protected.
Well, and it was funny because while you guys were talking about this, I went and looked on my Vudu. I was expecting, like, I wonder, isn't there like a little asterisk next to the buy or something like that? No, there isn't. And I went through the terms of service. I went and looked through everything. They make it very difficult for you to find any idea of whether or not you actually own any of the stuff on there. Again, I was with you on your side on your argument, Paul, but I know what Rick's saying as far as the limits of the law at this point.
For sure, I know.
Yeah. So yeah, it is one of those things. They like to play games with you for sure. But Corbin Dallas takes us back to the Steamboat Willie point here and says, with $5, thank you. I want someone to make a gay ghost or gay steamboat. I don't know why I said the gay ghost, but gay Steamboat Willie to force Disney's hand to make a decision on whether or not they would support or fight it. Well, again, this is something that would probably fall more into public domain.
Wolkifying Steamboat Willie to try and sort of parallel what Disney has done to the recently acquired IPs.
It would be hilarious for a skit, and it would fall under parody already. The big thing here is you're not going to want them, like there was, okay, here's the good example is that Mickey Mouse Trap movie. The movie itself is not a problem. It's the title. I guarantee you that's what's going to get them in trouble, or at least get them to the point where they're going to have to do some changes or whatever. Because otherwise, that all falls under like parody, satire, whatever you want to call it, to where as long as they don't have Mickey Mouse in the title of the movie, they're fine. They're probably just going to have to change it to Steamboat Willie something or other or whatever. But even then, it's the little silly things that they're just going to want to really, if it gets to a point where you're obfuscating or confusing the line between did Disney make this? Is it Disney's Mickey Mouse or is it something else's Mickey Mouse? You're probably going to be okay. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be saved by having just a disclaimer at the beginning either. So I've seen some people come at me with that too, because that's not going to save your ass. I don't think at the end, Rick, right? As if you're not staying within the confines of what falls into public domain, correct?
Right. No, I mean, disclaimers can be useful to try to establish what your state of mind is. Hey, I'm trying to be a good faith actor on these kinds of things, but they aren't legally cognizable. They don't get you out of things, right? So I think you have a disclaimer on your channel for fair use in the description, things like that. Like that's useful to know that the intent is to abide by the law, right? We're not trying to be pirates on the 7 seas here with whatever it is that we're referencing. We think it's fair use. But will the disclosure actually say, oh, well, then we can't bring a court case against them? No, that's not what it does.
Exactly.
Tom, could that horror movie, could they use the word Mickey? Just Mickey?
No. See, that's the weird thing, because some people are like, well, it's Mouse Trap, which is one word. It's like, I don't think that's going to matter. I think Disney's going to argue that it's still confusing. And again, it may not even go to court, right? Because I remember Universal threatened to go after that Grinch movie, but it still came out. So my guess is that Universal, I don't know how far it went. I didn't follow the case, but I don't think it went anywhere too far because the movie came out. It's out. You can buy it now. They just call it The Mean One. I bet you it fell under satire and parody, basically. Even though it's a horror movie, it still falls into that category to where Universal wasn't able to do shit. As long as they weren't trying to pretend it was the Grinch and it was owned by the Universal Grinch or whatever. You know what I mean? I think as long as they did that, they were fine. Same kind of thing here. If they take Mickey Mouse out of the title, I think they'll be okay. And that's just my interpretation of the Grinch situation and other things we've had in the past. And I'm curious if Rick knows anything about this, if he's followed any of those or has an opinion.
I haven't, but I mean, it's all risk assessment, right? We're all talking about what's the other party going to do? What are their likelihood of success? So, right, you can have your own risk assessment. I've got clients that'll say, all right, let's go. And I've got clients that say, oh no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Let's change up what we're doing entirely. And so it's an unknown variable. And yeah, I think you use the word Mickey and Mickey Mouse in that order, even if it's Mouse Trap. I think you're running a bigger risk.
Yeah.
Does that mean that Disney will win at the end of the day? Does that mean they'll even make a claim? I can't promise you those things, but it's a bigger risk than not using it.
That's what I'm kind of saying too. Exactly. Thank you. And let's keep moving along here because I'm sure some folks want us to get onto a different topic at some point.
That's lawyers for you.
I know, right? We're going to have a recess here in a few minutes. Hollywood Apocalypse sends in 35 South African rands. Thank you again. Says, can you blame us for pirating when DVDs are not made here anymore and we don't have the ability to buy video on demand without a VPN in South Africa? Yeah, this is another thing. Outside of the US, digital streaming is not as beloved. right? And in some areas, you either have internet issues or availability issues. And I know this was a big deal when Disney announced that they were no longer going to be distributing digital or physical media in Australia. A bunch of people got upset about it, and rightfully so. So yeah, this can continue to be a problem for the next. I don't know. It's gonna be a while probably, but yeah, I don't know if anybody has any comments on this, but I feel your pain to a point, Hollywood Apocalypse, because I actually lived in a pretty rural area for a long time that had shit internet service. So that's half the reason I moved here.
Yeah, no, I mean it's law versus ethics, right? I say it all the time, but what's right is not always legal. What's legal is not always right, and it's the reverse too. So it's really an ethics question how you feel about these things. I'm a lawyer. I'm barred by the state of Michigan to not tell you to violate the law. So don't violate the law, folks. But we each have our own understanding of what's right and wrong.
That's a good way of putting it, I think. Let's see here. We got this one here from Cryam, who says, if nothing else, we need clauses for a minimum duration of support of the date of purchase. Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, Cryam, but I don't know if there's any way that you can do that, because I mean, they're already set up to whenever they have a license. Let's say, for the sake of argument, this happened when Fox was bought by Disney. Let's say you have a handful of Fox titles in your video on demand catalog that you bought. Now, even though Disney bought those, they're still legally obligated to hold out the license for however long Amazon, Vudu, iTunes, whoever it was you were signed up and subscribed through to have your digital library. So you're still safe in most cases. It's just, and that's the sad part, is that people are just starting to notice this now, because it's been happening for a while, but we just have more and more people every day getting larger and larger libraries. And this is where I've ran into this thing, like Paul was like, oh, somebody, ha ha ha. No, it's just more so that I have that many things that now I have at least a handful of things that are no longer available to buy, but I at least still have access to them for now, right? So they're doing the best they can. I'm not trying to give them an excuse, but I don't know. Does anybody else have any thought on this point? But I mean, I get what you're saying, Cryam, but I don't know if that's really a viable thing that you can hold these companies to, especially when they're licensing out for already set amount of times anyway, is what I'm trying to say.
I think it's okay to be angry about the stuff that you get lost access to. I think that's useful.
Absolutely.
To putting pressure on getting the contracts right behind the scenes. But the folks that are in the best position to do that are the platform holders themselves.
Yeah. But thank you, Cryam. We appreciate that. And that's an interesting point. We got Eclipse Warlord here, sends in 2 and says EULA reviewing Louis Rossmann. I'm not sure what he's.
Louis Rossmann. Oh, the EULA ruling. Louis Rossmann is a tech person who has been fighting the corporations from what's it called? A right to repair.
Yeah, he's focused on right to repair, right?
Yeah, so he is the right to repair guy. And he's done actually a brilliant job. He actually helped go after John Deere. And I don't know how that has resolved itself, that John Deere would not let farmers repair their own tractors. And let me tell you, a combine is not a cheap Lexus.
That's interesting. I'd heard something along those lines, but I didn't recognize the name. So thank God we have nerds like you, Paul.
Yes, Louis Rossmann has been fighting the good fight on this. In fact, it's gotten to the point where people with John Deere equipment have been hacking Russian software onto it that allowed them to manage and maintain it. Because you can imagine, you're in the middle of the field, you've got to get your crops in, something goes, and then you got to schlep this giant machine to the dealer and have them do little adjustments, while your corn is burning.
Well, wilting or something, withering away or something. Yeah.
Burning sounds more dramatic.
Maybe he's an interstellar. We don't know.
Maybe it's a popcorn thing, and you have to take it out of the fire just at the right time.
That's right.
Well, like I said, I didn't know who Louis Rossmann was, but until you said the John Deere thing, because I'm from Wisconsin, so that I heard about something about that. But yeah,
oh, there's something that you identified with.
That was it. See,
but he started with computers and iPhones and smartphones, and companies basically no longer letting repair facilities from buying certain components to fix products, that even products that were no longer fixable by the main manufacturer of those products. They were trying to stop even that from happening. But it goes all the way to dumpster divers in China that would park themselves outside of the manufacturers and grab components that were deemed not adequate. They'd go into the dumpster and then take all the components out and then sell them to North American and European repair shops.
Yeah. A tipping barn sends in $4.99, says, great conversations this morning. RIBF folks. I don't know if I get that. Very informative. Also, Paul, when are you in the public domain? My OC is Paul Chato. Do not steal.
I would say that I turn 70 in April, so that means another 5 years I will be in public
unless you
domain.
become a public figure of some type, like a senator.
No,
then you're screwed.
From my birthday, that you can do whatever you want with me.
Oh, I've got pictures already.
Yeah,
I'm clipping that.
And then one more here on the sharing aspect. Patrick SP71 sends in $4.99 and says, upload DVDs to Plex and share your TV shows and movies with family, friends, not in the same location. Yeah, I've heard people talk about this Plex thing. In fact, somebody had shared their thing. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet. I just don't have the time right now, but yeah, well, I've heard about them.
If people log into your Plex server, then and they're not paying for it, well, no one wants to pay for it. Again, yeah, Plex is really meant to be a localized media server, but I don't listen to my advice.
You're not a lawyer, so we can tell them to do whatever the hell they want.
I don't want this channel to be sued.
Well, there's that too, but we're not legally obligated for anything anybody does off this channel, even Mexican Iron Man.
What's that movie? It's Jim Carrey where he says, quit breaking the law, asshole.
Oh, that's Liar Liar.
Is that Liar Liar?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that one. I'm sorry. I unapologetically love that. Stop breaking the law, asshole. Is that true? It has to be.
Well, there's this. I put it in one of my appalling news items. Rand Paul ran into a problem where a whole crapload of his stuff was plagiarized. Just a ton of his election materials. And so his quote was, well, we've put into place systems to vet what's coming in and to prevent any kind of future plagiarization. And my punchline is, just don't do it. Don't put systems in to prevent it. Just don't do it. It's pretty simple.
Right?
What? Huh?
Yeah. Stop copying shit.
Just don't do it. Yeah. Stop copying shit.
Like,
it all goes away.
Learn how to do more than copy and paste, maybe. Like, jazz it up a little.
Yeah. Put some stickers, animal stickers around it.
No, that's pizzazz or whatever it is.
Pizzazz, sorry.
Yeah. ActionCom sends in $2, says it's not right and wrong, it's legal and illegal. Yeah, but I do like what Rick said there. That was a very very like TV lawyer thing to say.
Sure. Law has nothing to do with justice.
Correct.
It has a limited amount to do with justice.
Yeah, I see a Southern lawyer saying that whole like, what's always right is not legal, and what's always legal is not right.
We're not talking about justice. We're talking about the law.
That's right. I'm just a simple country lawyer. Mark's 117B sends in $4.99 and says, question, do you know of SCP? It's community run and controlled IP that's open source or public domain. How is something like that handled? I am not, but it looked like you might be, Rick, from your...
You sniff it?
Well, I don't know the details of how the SCP community is specifically handled, but there are all sorts of ways to enter into a contractual commitment for what you create that otherwise opens up the copyright from the get-go, right? We see this a lot in software. We see a lot of open source software and what we call copyleft kind of contract concepts, which is when I make this thing, it's available to everybody. And when you use it to make your own derivative work, you promise to make that available to everybody. And you mandate that certain contract terms are going to be a part of anybody's use of it. which is a protection that's done through contract and not statute. So it's not technically law, it's contracts between individuals. But you can kind of try to help mandate that what you create, what you put out into the universe, will be available and free to everyone. SCP probably has contractual commitments that are something like that, use a Creative Commons license, whatever it might be, to make sure that people consistently have access to it. I'm familiar with the community primarily from its adjacency to the Remedy video game Control. If you know that one, I love Alan Wake. Alan Wake 2, of course, just came out last year, was my favorite game last year, but Control takes place in that same universe and features a government bureaucracy that handles paranatural things in the same vein with like a very bureaucratic approach, which is what SCP does. It catalogs weird things and is essentially a kind of combined fiction community, if I understand things correctly. But I don't know how they specifically run it, but you can absolutely do it with contracts.
All right. Well, how much more time did you have, Rick? Because I know you're getting low on time here.
Yeah, I have
we
to
pretty much
go
extinguished
pretty soon.
most of these. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and plug your stuff, that'd be great.
Absolutely. If you want to hear more from me, if you want to talk about video games, business, law, technology, I'm doing all of that through a couple of different shows that I have on my channel. Virtual Legality is the one that really gets into the weeds the most. And then I also do a show called Hangouts and Headlines, which talks about various news items that are happening very often in technology, where we talk about how things are reported on, what the facts on the ground are of complex situations, and also hang out with the community. So if either that sounds interesting to you, come check out the channel. It's at Hogue Law at YouTube, which is the same place for my address on Twitter /X. So if you want to hear about that, or mostly this week, me loving my Michigan Wolverines, the national champions of college football, you can come follow me on Twitter there. But we do a lot of fun stuff on the channel. I'm very happy to have been invited here. I was telling the folks in the pre-show that I'd watched Midnight's Edge primarily for the Paramount contract stuff a little while back. And so I was very happy to be invited here. And I'm hopeful that I was able to be informative and educational on these very complex topics dealing with Mickey Mouse,
awesome.
Disney, and otherwise.
Yeah. In fact, if you didn't see the
much.
private chat, yeah. But Master Clockwork, I think, had one here that I want to grab your opinion on, because I'm not following this very well, so I don't know much about it. I don't know if you are, but thoughts on SAG-AFTRA signing a deal with voiceover studios for AI use in video games. Some see it as a slap in the face regarding the recent strikes. Have you been following this at all?
Well, I mean, I think I've only seen what has been out there as an announcement from SAG-AFTRA, which says that they've entered into what I would describe, you got a press release from a union, so it's a little bit unclear the details of what's happening behind the scenes, but I would describe
I
it
thought
as
since it was video games, I'd ask, but yeah.
A master agreement kind of concept, right? So they've entered into a kind of arrangement with a studio that's going to make AI voices available, right? Which is scary, and certainly if you're in acting, but it's the kind of thing that SAG-AFTRA should be doing. One of the things they say in their press release is that affected members of the voiceover group essentially approved of this, and then a bunch of people came out online and said, I didn't approve of anything. And I think that's a little bit of lawyering, right? That press release doesn't say that even a majority of people approved. It doesn't say anything except some folks that this might affect said this is okay. But I think it's probably a step too soon to say it's a problem one way or the other, except for offending, of course, the people that are in your union, in that it's a master services concept, so that you're still talking about overall terms that would have to be entered into on an individualized basis with these various AI entities. But AI is one of those areas where I think the law is certainly behind. The law has no idea what to do with derivative works and these kinds of things. And I'll probably talk about the OpenAI lawsuit later this week. But even outside of that, the actors and the various people that are affected by these things, I don't think even knows what this kind of contract would look like. So there's a certain amount of fear that's also coloring the statements. I don't blame them, but I can't speak with details because I don't think the press release was very detailed or clear.
No, the press release was really confusing because in one interpretation, it sounds like this is a third-party agency that is going to essentially represent voice actors in video games and license out their voices and secure payment for the use of those voices back to them, as if they are as if the actors is an owner of their digital voice that is going to be used for AI. But the language is kind of poor, because it also makes it seem like, well, maybe the person of the originator of the voice doesn't actually own it. It's now this company that owns it, and then they license it out. And it's really shoddily done. And I think that it's a bit too much of a leap for SAG-AFTRA to kind of entertain this idea at this point without knowing all the variable possibilities that could happen beforehand. It seems like they're just leaping before they look, in my opinion. But as more information comes out, I think we'll have a better idea of what this actually entails.
Yeah, I think it's certainly an unwise piece of messaging, right? Because your own union members don't know what you're talking about. They get upset by a totally plausible negative reading of what you just described. And that's a fail in messaging, first and foremost, right?
Yeah.
So whatever you did, it should have been described better because nobody knows what you're talking about, SAG.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, the actors are not known for their words, which is why they should have reached out to a writer, because we got a really good contract against AI this past year. So,
but yeah, with that, I want to thank you so very much, Rick. This has been a great and informative show with you today. We're gonna stick around because we got a little bit more to go, but Rick has to take off. But he's welcome back anytime, of course. You know how to get a hold of us, and we'll definitely hopefully be in touch with you in the future if you're willing to come back again. There's
Sure.
many things I'm sure we'd love to discuss with you, including Paramount and stuff, which I think we're not going to be able to get to today anyway. So yeah, so hopefully we can see you again soon.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Rick. Take care.
Take care of yourself. Thank you. All right, guys. So before we get back into the super chats here, which I know some of them have been up there for a while, but we got one little bit more of news I think we got to touch on here real quick, and that is Favreau's Mando movie. Because this is sort of surprising news. And Andre, you did a video on this yesterday, and we talked about it on Midnight's Edge After Dark with you a little bit. But I'm curious to hear what everybody else here, including Script Doctor and Paul, of course, who were with us last night, to discuss this.
Yeah. You heard from me already. I basically already outlined both in the video we published yesterday on Mr. H Reviews yesterday and on Midnight's Edge After Dark, the clip of which is already in live archives, that I think I don't know this. I don't have any inside information here, none at all. This is just my interpretation, but I think that this is something that Bob Iger is responsible for, and that it's relatively recent. Like, for instance, I don't think that this project existed before summer. I think that this is something that came about after Kathleen Kennedy failed so utterly miserably with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and Dave Filoni showed very clearly that he's not capable of being the creative lead of Lucasfilm with Star Wars Ahsoka Season 1, which they say is in development for Season 2, and it probably is. But I don't think anyone were too pleased with Season 1 there. I think that this is Bob Iger once again going to Jon Favreau saying that you need to take one for the team, and I'll pay you a shitloads for it, just like I did with the Lion King live-action remake and the Jungle King live-action remake. You need to go in and fix Star Wars for me. I think this is Bob Iger going in over the head of Kathleen Kennedy, because based on the reading of this, it appears that the Mandalorian movie is the first thing that's going into production. This is the last thing that was announced. Yet it appears that all the resources are being devoted to this, because they say here that this is the priority. This is the one that's going to go first. I don't know how happy Kathleen Kennedy, Sharmino by Chinoy, and Dave Filoni is about that. Even though Kennedy and Filoni is listed as producers, I think that's mostly a marquee thing. I think this is a Bob Iger thing in a desperate attempt to get some positive hype, some feedback, something good to bring up in the next Disney shareholder meeting. That's my gut feeling and my hunch here. Mr. Chato, am I completely off the base?
No, I don't think so at all. I want to add one thing before I add on to what you just said, and that is, I said a long time ago, I can't remember it was on my channel or here, that we hadn't heard from Favreau because he has been given a wad of cash to be parked at Disney, so he won't go anywhere else. So he has been a wonderful quiet individual. There has been no controversy, no rumors, no back channel stuff, because the man has integrity, and he's doing what he's told. And he was told by someone, just stick around. We're going to give you we're going to give you Star Wars. And I still think that's going to happen. That's my prediction. He's been given a wad of cash to just hang around. And once Kathleen Kennedy and the Filoni bullshit all subsides, he's going to be taking over Star Wars. That's my prediction. So, and this to me is kind of the beginning of that Iger has inserted himself in other movies to, my understanding, to fix them, because he doesn't like what the other people are doing, which the president of Disney should not be doing, by the way. But he feels the need to do it. And now he's created a parallel Star Wars production unit, which I think is crazy.
Do we know that he's done that? That this is a parallel unit? I'm not saying that it isn't.
I think it's going to be, for all intents and purposes, this is his Star Wars. This is
honestly think
Star Wars.
I think up to a point, what I think is going on here is this is whatever last hangover bits that Favreau had left. This is probably what was going to be season 4 of Mandalorian, or the stuff that Favreau had for season 4.
Sure.
And it's probably only going to be the stuff that has to do with Mando and Baby Yoda.
But it doesn't.
See, all the other characters
matter.
are supposed to get sucked up into Filoni's stuff.
It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with
supporting
Kennedy.
your point. I'm supporting your point, Paul.
Yeah. I'm just saying that whatever it is that he ends up doing, this is a parallel production system.
That's what I mean. I don't think this is going to have anything to do with any of the other stuff. I think this is going to mainly be a Baby Yoda Mando movie. We're not going to see Ahsoka. We might see Luke. I said that would be ironic and hilarious if that's how this thing ends. Is he hands the damn baby over to Luke. That's the end. Because then that'll be basically Favreau telling us that was where it was meant to end in the beginning with this baby. So, but that's neither here nor there right now. But yeah, I agree with you. I think this is something that was over Kennedy's head with like Andre said. But the other thing we just learned is, now this is from Valiant, Renegade, and Pro. So I don't have another source for this, but I guess this is now taking the place of the Rey movie, which has now been pushed. Which is no surprise since there's
very interesting. How long has it been pushed?
I don't know.
Probably a year because they don't have a script.
Exactly. I was just going to say that script.
We were told that they wouldn't be shooting at the earliest until the fall.
Yeah, that's what we were told, and that's about
and this feels like it's getting rushed.
Contract last as well, because here's the thing that's going to be really interesting to pay attention to. It's really interesting here. Is that now this is the priority. This is what's going first. According to this press release, all of the other Kennedy projects, they are happening in this moment. But will they actually happen? Or is something going to happen between now and the release of this?
Will the buck get stopped again?
Where all of the other stuff goes away. If that were to happen, if suddenly the Rey movie goes away, if the James Mangold movie goes away, the Filoni movie probably happens because that's Mandoverse. But if those two other movies go away, then we're seeing a major shift here. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying that is something that's worth watching out for.
Well, I'm just saying Favreau is the best brand that they've got.
For sure.
And you would be in big trouble to fuck with that.
As I said in the video yesterday, Favreau is Star Wars' last hope. He's not the new hope. He's their last hope. It's Favreau or no one.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree, which is why I don't think you're going to hear this canceled.
And I don't think this thing.
Oh, no.
This they're serious about this thing. I'm not so sure about the Rey movie and the thing there. And those are things that I'll be watching out for, because if something happens and those things don't happen, they just push them back and then they just wither away like 9 and 10 other announced Lucasfilm productions. Then we're looking at something tremendously interesting behind the scenes.
Yes, what you're bringing up, and you kind of alluded to part of this yesterday, Andre, in your video, and this is what I think is interesting about this. This makes me wonder if Bob had a fucking thing now to do with the Ray movie. I'm not trying to stick up for Bob.
No.
Here's what I'm trying to say, because there's historical precedent set for this, and we've brought it up many, many, many times. It's what got us right to this point where we're at right now, and that was the moment when Bob Iger very publicly, and this was the only time anybody had basically thrown Kathleen Kennedy under the bus in any way. Now, she wasn't named, but Bob Iger basically said mistakes were made. The buck stops with me on Star Wars. Remember that, because that's the moment when shit changed and Kathleen Kennedy was busy off over here doing her little Blood and Bones project. And as long as she had Filoni there, whatever, it didn't matter. But Favreau was, for all intents and purposes, technically in charge of everything, right? He was running the Mando for the first 2 seasons. And then it's, well, no, it goes up through the second season because the
Filoni had more of a foothold in season 2.
He may have, but the point is he still had his. Let me finish my point here, because this is what happened. He was still way into the game, because the Luke Skywalker bit was literally the moment where everybody could argue, regardless of how you felt about it, that was the most palpable Star Wars moment we had since we had heard we were getting the original crew back together with The Force Awakens, right? So you had the first time in history where you had Star Wars fans back on board with what was going on the screen, regardless if it was big or little. But what happened then was Bob Chapek, of all stupid people, the one dumb thing he did was said, Kathy, quit worrying about Blood and Bones. We're going to sell that in turnaround or whatever it was. You get your ass back over here and worry about Indiana Jones and Star Wars. And boy, did she. Because that's the moment when Gina Carano was cut loose and everything went to fucking hell. That is the moment where everything went off the rails. That's when Boba Fett happens. That's when Boba Fett becomes a de facto fucking Mando season 3. That's when Mando season 3 becomes some other fucking thing that was never meant to be. Rangers of the Republic falls away. All the other shows that were promised around that fall away. And Ahsoka becomes the new primary fucking focus. And then all of a sudden we get announcements for a Rey movie, a Taika Waititi movie. What was the other one that's still sitting out there?
Remember the very important
the Filoni one, but and the Mangold one. That's what I was trying to think of. But yeah, so we got those. So then all of a sudden now you do this Sinead Annoy thing where she fucking annoys everybody, and this has been the talk of the fucking town for the last week. So what I see here is a resurgence of what happened right after Solo again, when and on that sense of where Bob said, "Okay, enough's enough. I'm going to do this now." And he's coming in and saying, the only thing that we've done in the last fucking 5 years that's worked is Mandalorian. And that's when Jon Favreau was in charge. And it's when he had that goddamn baby and he had the Mandalorian, not this Ahsoka Tano shit, not this other crap that you're doing here. And so I think that Andre's 100% correct. This is the buck stops with me moment. He went over her helmet and he fucking did this. And this is probably sending her into a tizzy right now, because they didn't have a movie set for next year either. Especially now that it's been delayed, as Script pointed out, because this was the one that Damon Lindelof originally was working on, and then he got booted, and then now they have this other writer on it.
He wasn't working on it. He was pitching to try and get a job.
It or whatever.
It's way different. Working on it means he was hired. He was never hired. I don't want people to go out there and think that Disney was actually going to hire this guy. As dumb as Disney is, they're not that dumb. But I will say you're missing one very, very important point, and that is over the summer, 2 movies were announced, Rey and the Dave Filoni one. And one was announced right in front of Jon Favreau. And his entire demeanor for that was stoic and mute and he almost without any reaction to it. Then Ahsoka debuted and ended in October. And the writer's strike was still going on. So that means Favreau was not able to really negotiate or talk with Disney up until that point. In the last 2 months, November and December, you could bet dimes to dollars that Iger told Favreau, we are screwed by going with this Dave Filoni direction. We need a movie. Kathleen Kennedy is looking at another director for her Rey film. That's probably not going to happen. Can you rework your season 4 of Mandalorian into a feature film that we can start in production right away? And that's what's happened. That's what we got this week. because there's no way you sit on a Jon Favreau movie and not announce it at a D23 celebration when there's so many people that loved The Mandalorian.
Exactly. That's what I mean. That's why this is something that's come about recently, after the recent failures.
Right. And what bullets do you have left in your armory? 2, Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, even though I think he's been abused and should go into, community service, or should be taken away by whatever, childcare. But, if you're going to be excited about anything, Favreau, Mandalorian, Baby Yoda, that's a way more interesting possibility than a Rey movie.
Yeah. I will say this, though. As of this moment, I am not excited, and I will say why.
Yeah, I agree. I know.
The reason I'm not excited is because this comes first, and this may change, but as of this moment, what comes after, what is scheduled and officially announced to come after this, it's the Rey movie, it's the James Mangold movie, the Dave Filoni, nothing can, fine. That's Mandoverse. So let be bygones on that one. But we have the Rey movie that's going to destroy the future of Star Wars, and we have the Mando movie, the James Mangold movie that's going to ruin the past of Star Wars, probably setting up Rey as the savior all along or something like that. And as long as that is the case, who is to say that the Favreau Mandalorian movie doesn't also set up Rey later on? As long as that happens, as long as all the roads still lead to Rey, I don't care about this. I will be excited the moment we get some kind of announcement or some kind of major indication that no, the Rey movie ain't happening, and the Mandalorian doesn't lead to the sequel trilogy and Rey. That's the moment when I will be excited. They can still fix this. I'm not saying they're going to, but until that happens, there's no reason to be excited.
Yeah, I agree.
Because if we get this thing here, and we are getting this, but if this, hypothetically, that Jon Favreau has been such a good company man, such a loyal servant to Iger, that I'll do what you want, and I know that my battle is lost here, so I'm gonna go do something that's functionally a prequel for the Rey movie. That's what this is. Abandon all hope. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but I'm saying that as of this moment, that is looking more likely. We've even heard rumors that the Rey movie is even going to have a cameo by Grogu. Well, how does that happen? Well, that gets set up in this movie. That's how that happens. So until we get some kind of major indication that that is not happening, I'm not excited.
I think the Rey movie is going to be a musical along the lines of the next Joker.
I'm much more excited about the next Joker, to put it that way. I mean, that's one of the 2 movies I'm really looking forward to this year. This thing right here, I'm glad that Favreau is back, but I won't be proper glad until I learn that he's the only one who's back and who has a long-time future in Lucasfilm.
I mean, is it coming out of desperation? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So,
but are they desperate enough? Are they desperate enough to end everything else? Because that's what they need to do. I mean, as it is right now, this is a band-aid on a bleeding wound. I mean, this is not enough.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
So I'm gonna need more. I'm gonna need more. And the moment I get more, that's when I change my tune. That's when some scoopers out there who've been saying that Favreau has more power than we think is gonna get their credit due. But
I don't know if it's power.
I want some more indications of what's really going on behind the scenes here.
All I'm saying is that Disney is desperate that he doesn't go someplace else.
Yeah, this is their last chance to hold on to him.
Yeah, I'm kind of amazed that he hasn't gone with James Gunn to DC already.
Oh, it's been discussed.
Yeah, by us. I don't know what kind of discussions have happened behind the
They're
scenes.
good friends. I'd be shocked if they haven't had some chat.
Haven't gone to lunch a couple of times over the last few months. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. Again, that's what I mean. This is a good start, but I'm gonna need a hell of a lot more before I allow myself to get excited or even hopeful.
I'd like to see Favreau get onto other movies that have nothing to do with superheroes or Star Wars or anything.
I'd like him to do another movie like Chef. That was great.
Yeah.
I'd like to see him either take over Star Wars completely or get the hell out of that sinking ship. I mean, if what he's going to do is just do something that's going to set up for a Rey movie later on, then what the hell is the point? Then
Well,
he's
that's my
wasting his
point.
time. Yeah.
He is a successful director in Hollywood, which is why I'm saying he's someone backed up a Brinks truck to his garage and said, "Shut up, you're staying and you're not going anywhere."
Well, then they better have offered him something better.
And now they're
to say he still doesn't have any like creative control title of any type that I know.
No, he doesn't. And
this is just his project now. Like that's what I'm saying. And this is why I don't think it's trending all that much, because I think most people see it for what it really is, and that's a desperate move on whomever's part, whether it's Kathleen Kennedy, Bob Iger, or somebody else that made this decision, or even Favreau came to them and said, "I still have a little bit left in me in the tank." Whoever did it, them deciding to do this the way they're doing it, especially with Rey, taking its original spot, and they're kind of basically fast tracking this, tells me it's a sign of desperation at this point, because it's the only two things that they have that work: that damn fucking Baby Yoda and But I think Six pointed out so poignantly last night, and I've seen many other people point out since, that this is basically Homework the fucking movie now, unfortunately. Because how many people really did watch The Mandalorian? Yeah, it was a big hit for Disney Plus, but it was also a big hit for Disney Plus when Disney Plus was in its infancy, right? So that's like saying that, yeah, I have a Picasso here, but it was a Picasso from when he was like 12. So it's, I mean, to some people that might be worth more, but to others, it's probably not going to be worth as much. But because it's not as well known, and it's not like some, excellent painting or whatever. It's just a cat, But anyway, point being is there really an audience for this? And Six, that was a great point you made last night, because I don't know, because I sure as hell pointed that out a lot back then. There's a lot of people I know who love Baby Yoda, but have no idea about anything about the show, because they're like, "Oh yeah, my kids love the Baby Yoda stuff." Well, it's like, what do you think about the show? I don't know. We never watched it. They just love the Baby Yoda.
Yeah, this is the problem. This really is Homework the movie. Even more, every bit of, it's less Homework the movie than the Filoni movie is going to be. That movie, that's going to be Homework the movie. I mean, just imagine the Filoni movie that's going to throw on. I mean, you're going to have to watch the entire animated Filoni-verse. You're going to have to watch all the Mandalorian. You're going to have to suffer through Ahsoka. All of those things are required viewings now for the Dave Filoni movie. That's Homework the movie. I don't think there's ever been a movie with more required homework. And that's 100 hours of TV or something that you're going to have to suffer through just to get the Filoni movie. Only a few of which are enjoyable. Yeah. I don't get what, like, they shouldn't do any. Yeah, sending the Mandalorian to theaters is desperation, because that is Homework the movie. It needs to be a Disney Plus movie, if anything, with or without Favreau.
Well, this is going to theaters, and I don't know about the Dave Filoni movie. That's the only one I'm not sure about, because I know the Rey movie is supposed to be coming to theaters. And I believe the Damon Lindelof project, which is another one I think that's going to fall off eventually here, unless that is his, basically his, my thing is either that's going to fall off because of the problems with Indiana Jones, or Indiana
talking about
Jones.
you're not Lindelof. You
Damon
mean
Lindelof? What do you mean?
I'm sorry, we're talking about Lindelof in the background here. Mangold, that's what I meant.
Mangold.
Yeah.
With Mangold, either that or because this was his promise and he did Indiana Jones as a favor to get to this. That's the only way this thing is happening.
Well,
But even then, Indiana Jones wasn't a hit. So yeah, that's the problem we have here. So I agree with you guys that Mangold's project is probably not going to happen no matter what. Filoni's is that going to be Disney Plus? Does anybody know offhand?
Well,
that's the only one I'm not sure on.
It's theatrical.
It's theatrical. Okay, that's what I wasn't sure on. Because otherwise, the only one we don't see here that I thought was kind of funny is we don't see Taika Waititi mentioned here.
Yeah, which I take to mean that project is dead.
That's my assumption. So another revolving door bites the dust, as they say.
They didn't ask me, and I wouldn't do it if they did.
You'd probably dodge a bullet at this point by not.
Yeah, no Ryan Johnson was mentioned either, but I think at this point we all kind of knew.
I have integrity, but it can be purchased.
But do you have integrity?
I have integrity also.
It's good.
That's on discount.
Correct, because it's missing
the
2 letters.
First 2 letters.
No, it's a joke from South Park. Anyway,
that I didn't know.
Yeah, well, that's the weed that.
That's right.
Stan's dad sells integrity.
And what
weed.
was the town that they live in?
Well, they're outside of South Park, Colorado. No, they don't.
No. There was another. They were Integrity. That was the Integrity Farm.
Oh, Integrity Farms is where he grows the weed.
Right. Because
he's got integrity now.
That's right.
Yeah, you got to kind of go back and see the whole storyline, but yeah. Anyway, I just I figure we had a better touch on this since this was the talk for a hot minute. But I noticed that it didn't really trend very long, and as I was kind of pointing out to it, I think a lot of people just like the veneers wearing off. They're like, you're not going to trick us with this. You know, we still know the chicken nuggets taste like shit, no matter what you put in the Happy Meal.
That's right. Oh, I got chicken nuggets. I could have had that for lunch.
But I mean, if it's separated enough, if I see the trailer and it looks fun, I might just go see it just to support Favreau on that point. But like,
I don't want to see bad stuff. I'm not even going to review Echo. Like, I'm not watching it.
Oh, I don't unless Andre makes me. Yeah.
No, well, you already saw Hawkeye, so
that's the only reason I've considered it, because now the big thing is they've had to admit that the Netflix series are kind of sort of canon because they're promoting the hell out of them on Disney Plus the one creator or whatever, I can't remember who it was, said something about they're kind of sort of canon.
Yeah, which is a marked shift in tone after they scrapped what they had already filmed on.
I don't need to see Echo. I already know she kicked fucking Fisk's ass, so yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I know a bit just from what the reviewers were saying.
I was gonna say, from all the reviews, it's basically it's virtue signal, she kicks his ass.
Which is crazy.
Let's move on with
we're not hearing anything about Vincent D'Onofrio, whether or not his performance was good. Like, nobody's talking about that. It's all just cringe, woke crap.
Because his performance probably isn't all that great.
No, he's going to be good in anything.
He's good, but he got really fucking clowned in the end of fucking Hawkeye, though. That was
I didn't see that.
Yeah, I've seen clips. He looks pretty clowned here too. But
that's what I'm assuming. That's the problem.
We'll get back to that when we've seen more of it.
And yes, Vincent D'Onofrio is an excellent fucking actor. But if you got a shit director feeding him crap, you're going to get stuff like Jigsaw in fucking Punisher, man. Like, yeah, the movie one, the one that hammed it all up for the whole thing. But anyway. Let's get into these. As you said, Shoom sent us in way back at the beginning of the chat. Remember, for 33 months. Thank you, Shoom. You're still here. Sticky. Tom, what have you been doing to your Steamboat? Well,
we've already made that joke.
Oh, I'm sure we have. House of Trades is here, and he sends in a Canadian 5 and says, FX Hulu Shogun remake, the 1980 original, is a masterpiece. I love the series. My question is, how much should I be afraid Disney is going to ruin it? I'd say more than a 50% chance. Although the actor they have in it, I'm curious because it's the guy from Mortal Kombat and Bullet Train, who I said should play Splinter, if I remember correctly, if that's the guy who's in it. So I'm curious about it. So I might check it out. This might be one I actually do check into. When does this drop? Does anybody know?
In spring sometime.
Okay. Well,
a few months.
I think you're interested in it too. So that might
I'm
be one
interested in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful, but just because of the credits of the companies involved, I'm like, I'm not gonna get too excited until we see how they have actually pulled it off. But that's what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah. So yeah, we may check back into that one. And we've got Waltman here who says with $4.99 via DC, seems like Hollywood is trying to pressure Nintendo into making the Legend of Zelda movie woke, with Nintendo standing hard against it. So via DC,
is that via Doomcock or something? Is that what it's going to
okay, is that what he means?
I don't know. I haven't
heard
seen
this.
Doomcock's recent couple of videos, but I would not be surprised if Hollywood is trying to pressure Nintendo to wokeify something.
Yeah, I would, because Hollywood's not into that right now. Just Disney's. Because what studio is distributing the new Zelda movie?
Universal, isn't it?
Yeah, they've already started distancing themselves from wokeifying their products.
Yeah, but have all producers within the system though?
Those ones they're on a ticking clock right now before they're going to be expunged or having to move off to smaller productions. I know that right now because that's how the industry is already going in direction. We've already seen a couple of little purges at Paramount on the smaller side of things. I've seen some emails that people who were there in December are no longer there now. So technically nobody's, but they're the ones that if you Google them on IMDb and stuff, you'll see, oh, they worked on that terrible TV series.
Sony's they're pairing Paramount back to single mount.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion, but yeah, and this is under Sony. So
no, Sony will just make it bad. I mean, that's what Sony does.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd be more worried about it being bad before I'd be worried about being woke.
Yeah, I also would worry about that more.
Because Sony is just Sony. They do Sony things, and Avi Arad's the producer. Don't forget that. I think only by name, but as long as he doesn't Avi Arad, we should be okay.
Exactly. Like, because was Morbius woke? I'm just wondering.
No, it was just Morbius.
Morbius was Morbius, right? And then Venom 2, yeah. And then I think
there was some shit in Venom 2, but even that kind of made me laugh, so I don't count it as uber woke.
So yeah, I think if it's going to be a Sony distribution, I think it's going to be a little safe, at least, and until there's some solid evidence to say otherwise. I think we're okay on Zelda.
In fact, I would say with Venom 2, that's probably the best part of the movie is when Venom's in that gay bar and he doesn't realize that it's them relating to him because he thinks he's relating to them because they're gay, but it's the whole alien aspect. Like that part I thought was funny. Like this is how you use woke comedy, right? Like that was hilarious. It worked.
That's
the only memorable part of the movie, unfortunately. Like after that, I don't remember much else.
Oh,
I kind of remember red hair on Woody Harrelson.
I have to go, folks.
Oh, okay. Was there any these for you, Paul? I don't think so. I think we got all the ones that were mainly directed towards you. So, all right, we're going to be getting out of here soon ourselves. So, with that, Paul, tell everybody about your channels and get the hell out of here. I guess
the latest video is on my Call Me Chato one. A essay on is are we worse off now or versus the 60s? And I have my thoughts on that, and that took me a long time to get my head around it, but I think it's a pretty good video. So please watch. Are we worse off now than in the 60s?
I put my answer in the chat.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Paul.
Love the video, by the way. It was a great video. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Let's get back into here. We got Deform581 with $5. It says, isn't Rob Zombie making a horror version of Steamboat Willie? I hadn't heard of that, but I don't think he'd sink to that level yet. There is that horror one that they dropped that trailer for immediately.
Well, he did the monsters.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah, he did.
That was horrible from what I heard. I didn't even bother.
I saw a bit of it and I'm like, nope, I'm not. No.
I skimmed it. It's basically a prequel to the series.
Yes, it is.
It's not a reboot. It's a prequel to the Monsters TV series.
But it comes off like a bad Family Channel movie from the review I watched.
Kind of. It does.
Yeah.
Which is sad because the best updated version of the Munsters we ever had is one that most people don't even remember. And it was from right after the Addams Family reboot happened. It was on Fox TV. It was a backdoor pilot for new Munsters, and it had the main vampire from Lost Boys, Edward Herman, as Herman Munster. And he was just spot the fuck on. It was like, okay, now, and they casted it perfectly. It was like, and they did the same thing that they did with the Addams Family, just set it in the now, right? But they didn't change the family. They just changed the world around them and had them play more into the modern humor, as far as like, you know, fish out of water stuff, which worked for the Munsters and worked for the Addams Family just fine. So I think that might be on YouTube, but if it's not, I'm gonna have to find that one. It's a really good version of it. But yeah, I did not have any interest in the Rob Zombie Munsters at all. Days to Come sends in $4.99 and says James Cameron Terminator lawsuit over just a single image from back in the day, something he should have not lost just from the image, not the story.
Oh no. James Cameron fully admitted in a couple of written interviews that he got the idea for the Terminator from a couple of Outer Limits or Twilight Zone episodes that were directly written by Harlan Ellison. That's why Harlan Ellison sued and has his name accredited at the end of Terminator, because he won. Because partly James Cameron admitted it, and the other part too is that some of the story elements and executions of those elements were so similar to those original episodes that Ellison wrote that that was the only way that it could be settled. Otherwise, it would have. Otherwise, Harlan Ellison would have taken it the distance.
Yeah. Here's the thing that people look. I love James Cameron. You can love James Cameron. I'm not saying that anybody's wrong for loving James Cameron, but you're going to learn pretty quickly if you turn around and look at it. James Cameron was Pixar before Pixar. Not one thing he ever did was original. It never was.
I love how you framed that. Yeah, but you're right.
Everything he's ever done was something he saw and he just made it better. So there you go. It's okay to like him because he does that. He does. He takes,
Tarantino does the same thing to a degree.
Exactly. So again, everything even writing Rambo, he just got done watching Mission Action. Give me a break. And he's like, no, I'm just, but no, like he does that. And he at least gave him credit on that one. But there's been other times people have pointed shit out that he's done that they didn't even bother going after him for. But yeah.
Oh yeah, like by the time he did Avatar, he was too big for someone to even bother to go after.
Yeah. Why bother?
And Avatar is based off of a really old science fiction book from I think the 60s.
Well, there's a few things he clearly borrowed for that too.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot. Yeah, but like the blue aliens and the proxy, like your soul being transferred into their type of thing. That's, I think the book has on the cover something that looks more like a blue centaur type of alien creature, and he just made them cats because internet loves cats.
Zendian, I hate to tell you this, but the Titanic actually happened. No, even Titanic wasn't. No.
That's funny.
Marksman of 11.7B says that $1.99 says Control was an amazing game. I don't remember Control. Do you know Control? Is it on the Sega Mega Drive, Andre? Was that one Paul mentioned earlier? I probably did.
Yeah, the title doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, it doesn't for me either. Unless he meant Contra, perhaps. But
I don't know every single game that's on the Sega.
No, I'm not.
I mean, there's quite a few hundred of them.
I'm assuming
it's on the Sega Mega Drive.
I'm assuming Rick or Paul mentioned this is why it was brought up. So
or at least Contra is on the Sega Genesis on the Mega Drive.
Hogue mentioned it. Okay, so it is a game, and Hogue mentioned it. All right, sorry about that.
There we go.
That is my fault for not getting to it when he was still here. I apologize. Take full blame. ActionCom sends in $5. Says, ever hear of the back rooms? Can anyone ever own that? What's the back rooms? Is that like some dark web chat room thing or something? What is it?
I don't know the context with which he's referring.
Yeah, it's nothing I know of. Doesn't ring any kind of bell.
It comes up as a game on Steam. Concept originating from creepypasta posted on 2019 4chan thread.
All that stuff is too new to me. Like,
yeah,
all that stuff needs to get off my lawn.
It sounds like it's almost like fan made kind of thing anyway. So I mean, it sounds like maybe many people have maybe contributed to it over the years. I don't know. I have no idea. So yeah, I can't answer that. I'm really sorry, Action Common. This is the first I've ever heard of it. It's a creepypasta game though. So there you go. If you're into creepypastas. Me, I just like regular pasta. Chris K sends in $5. It says, have any of the gamers on the Midnight's Edge panel played Brutal Legend? It's old, but worth buying on Steam sale. Well, here, Chris, here's the problem. We're not gamers.
I know of it. I know exactly what this is.
But
this is the game.
Andre knows this because he does play some games.
I know this one.
We play some games. We're just not gamers. Yeah.
This is a sword and sorcery style game. Very metal. And it's voiced by Jack Black. So I know of the game. I do. I've seen some of the gameplay, but I've never played it. But I know
Same
of
here,
it.
I've no.
Yeah.
Now that you mentioned Jack Black, I kind of remember it, but
yeah. It looks pretty cool. Sounds pretty cool as well, but never played it.
Same. Sorry about that, Chris.
I actually think I have it for the PlayStation 3. It's one of the things I have in wrapping that I never even opened.
Yeah, but it doesn't exist in your household because there's no other system. Bucky Cat sends in 5 and says, I'd laugh if Favreau brought back Gina C as Cara Dune in this movie. I brought that up last night. That would
be a powerful signal.
That would. Yeah.
Then I wouldn't laugh. I mean, you don't laugh at that. Then you're like,
no, I'd be like, oh shit.
Yeah. That's what
like,
you do.
Favreau just dropped his pants and whipped it out.
Yeah. I mean, that's not something you laugh at. That's something you stare at in admiration.
Not only that would signal something you brought up last night in your video, and we've even taken some heat over the years about talking about the Civil War at Disney, and more specifically behind the scenes at Lucasfilm. And I've maintained it because myself, like, recently Chris over at Film Thread had a lot of the animators and stuff reach out to him. I too have in the past have had people come to me. They'll tell me who they are, how long they've worked there, give me enough information to verify who they are, and then they'll tell me how they feel, but they'll of course say they can't say anything about it. So we've known about this going on behind the scenes for a while. So yeah, like, to me, it feels like the war may have been lost, like you said in your video last night, Andre, for a while here. But if this is the case, then that means that was just a battle that was lost. The war is far from over.
No, actually, the war is over, but now you're being conquered by a completely different party. That's what happened.
Well, yes and no. It's the original party coming back with a fucking firestorm, basically.
Yeah, but now he's back. I mean, this is Napoleon coming back with with more backing. That's what's happening.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. That would definitely be a sounding salvo of sorts, or however you want to put it.
Yeah. I mean, that's when you perk your ears and you pay attention.
That's that moment. And which one is it? The Return of the King, where they think that all is lost at Helm's Deep or whatever it is, and then
Gandalf shows up with a light and stuff like that. Yeah. That's what that is.
Yep.
So no, that is not a laughing matter if that were to happen.
Indeed, I agree. I mean, I'd laugh in like jubilation, like of wow, like, holy shit, this is gonna get interesting, like that kind of a thing. The Fifth Dawn, yes. Fifth Dawn. Look at the was it the East Mountain? It's been a while since I've watched them. I should watch them at some point again. I gotta have time to watch those though, like 9.5 hours, 10 hours, whatever it is, plus breaks. Pinochet's Helicopter Tours sends in what I believe is our last super chat of the day. It's $2 and says, I think recent Ray movie push was backlash for South Park. No, this was announced before the South Park episode.
Yeah. Remember,
you got to remember that.
Summer. Yep.
This just took off because of her comments recently. That was the thing. She was already announced a while back. This is
yes.
And she was announced at the Star Wars Celebration in London.
Yeah. And this is where I agree with Script too, that if this Mando movie was in any shape or form ready to go or was even a thing, they would have announced it then with Favreau on the fucking stage.
That's right.
This is a new thing. This is not something that's been bubbling up for a while.
On the stage, but he was looking super awkward, like he didn't want to be there.
If anyone wants to try and pretend that this was something that they've known about for a while, has been in the works, fucking liars. I'm going to tell you that right now, because this is not something that was in the works even maybe a month or two ago, maybe at the most. But we also got to remember we were in a writer's strike. So go ahead.
Yeah, they were in a writer's strike, which ended in September. Ahsoka didn't finish debuting till October. It probably took them 6 weeks to verify all the view numbers and see how badly it performed. And then it would just be, okay, Bob Iger, right before the holiday break, he's like, okay, John, we're going to figure out something. We want you to do a movie. We're going to figure out something. You go right over the holidays and tell me if you can turn your season 4 of Mandalorian into a movie, or give me a movie script that we can put into production next year. And Favreau, having many years of experience and knowing how to write under a wire,
or just had it left over,
was probably able to, maneuver a sizable draft so that they could at least start production. I guarantee you they're going to be making or filming 2 Star Wars movies at the same time. They have the facilities to do it. I bet you Dave Filoni's film will probably be in production at that point, at the same time that Favreau's is, but Favreau's will probably be released first.
I agree with you. It'll take precedent, or whatever you want to say. And Dave and Rory Mitchell over on the Rumble side of things says David Taika Cohen's movie is canceled. Say it isn't so. Yeah, we pointed that out. That was not mentioned at all in this press release, in this recent one. And notice how this one was announced compared to the other things too, right? That's another thing to pay attention to.
It's a soft announcement. Like, that's
a very soft announcement. Almost like Kathleen Kennedy, if she was in charge of this, did everything she could to try and make it as quiet as possible.
I mean, I think it only debuted initially on the Star Wars Twitter.
It was on the Star Wars news outlet site.
News outlet, and then StarWars.com, and that was it. And then it hit the trades afterwards. It's like, that's weird.
It took a while, and it never really trended on my end that I could tell on Twitter. Like, not in any major way. Not Jon Favreau, not Mandalorian, not any of that stuff that I saw.
That's puzzling to me. I mean, this is a big announcement. Why did they do it so quietly? I mean, is this the Kennedy faction that are like, we do not want to give this any kind?
I think they may have some control over what
we want to do. I'm curious. Yeah,
over what gets out in the press, maybe. And this kind of goes back to the whole thing that if we heard before, if it was true, when somebody told KK to quit announcing shit, because that's the case. Because this feels like,
was announced, though. It was just announced with as little fanfare as you humanly can announce something.
You know what the best part is, though?
Press release.
We're going to have some of our answers, at least, when it comes to the shareholder thing coming up. We'll see how much Bob Iger talks about what.
Yeah. Good point, man. That's in what, 6 weeks? Less than 6 weeks?
Less than. If he comes out there and it's Mandalorian, Jon Favreau, Mandalorian, we're so excited, Baby Yoda, Mandalorian. Oh, and also Dave Filoni's doing this thing.
But basically the inverse of what Kennedy did with Filoni.
Exactly. So I'll have a counterpart to my Dave video.
To John's.
John's vision. John. And then we'll know, oh shit, this Civil War has reached the upper echelon now.
Yeah, that would be major. Because if that were to happen, that's when you really start paying attention to that Rey movie and to that
whether
other stuff. Because if they suddenly fall off the map, well, that means the Favreau movie is no longer building towards them. That happens.
Oh, remember, Kathleen Kennedy is still going to say that Rian Johnson is still working on his sequel, his own trilogy. When his time schedule frees up, he'll be coming back over to Disney to complete those films. Like, you just know she's ready to fire that out.
Seven Knives Out later.
Asks her about it.
She'll be dead before the fucking Rian Johnson trilogy happens. Are you kidding me? How many of those did he sign up for over at Netflix? I swear it was like a couple. I think he's up for at least 5, I think. Or okay, 4 then altogether, I think it is. But yeah. I wasn't kidding when I said he's going to be making these Knives Out movies until there are like 7 of them or whatever, because Netflix likes them.
The other part too, to your Zack Snyder credit, Netflix is the only person that's dealing with Rian Johnson right now. No one else is really entertaining some of the stuff.
Yeah, you got a good point there. Like Netflix has now become, instead of being like one of the more premier places, it's like the end of the road to go. If you ask me, it's definitely the straight to video bin.
Their own oversaturation of original content is actually killing their exclusivity, like, and also the prestige nature of what they were. Like that's the thing.
Agreed.
They're making too much too quickly. The quality varies significantly between the projects.
Yeah.
The only advantage is if you are a name and you have a dream project, Netflix is a great place to go. Like Martin Scorsese was able to get, he'd never been able to do the last two films theatrically proper because the studios would say you cannot make this 3 hours.
But noticed he moved from Netflix to Apple.
Oh yeah. And that's because
half of a studio, actually, half of the studio is involved, but yeah.
And I think that's to do with the fact that Apple is trying to boost up a little bit more of their profile on the streaming side of things, because they have started to realize that a lot of the stuff they're putting out has far better critical reception from the audience than some of the competition, and they might actually see a lucrative angle there.
The other thing is Killers of the Flower Moon is probably one of the first Scorsese movies that he probably could have pitched to studios, and in the wake of woke, I meant, he probably could have got that funded. So I'm kind of surprised he did do it this way. I'm not saying the movie is woke. I'm just saying it hits plenty enough of those notes.
It hits those notes. I think he could have got it funded, but I think the holdout is the
partially
fact
that
he wanted this to be a 3-hour-ish movie.
I agree. It's because that's the biggest problem with the movie is it's 3.5 hours long.
Yeah.
There should have been a
just
theatrical
like
cut
his
of
Irishman
this.
thing. The only reason he went to Netflix is because Netflix had no problem with that being like as long as it was. But all the other studios were like, Marty, come on.
Like, that was my only issue with the Irishman, beside it being obviously completely bullshit. But
yeah,
as a movie, it was just like, it's just a little too long. I would have liked to have seen a theatrical cut just to see what you could have done to pare this down a little bit. But yeah, Knives Out on Netflix. Sadly, they only have one knife. It's not the Knives Out, it's Knife Out. They can only afford one. But Six had to run out. Thank you for being here, Six, for all your help today. We appreciate it. And we're getting out of here after this. Pinochet's helicopter tourist says, I think her inciting comments were backlash for South Park. Those comments, okay, the ones that she made about Star Wars were more recent, correct? That was on because this is where people are getting things kind of confused. And we're talking about Charmin Obaid-Chinoy.
Her comments were done just before the holidays, if I'm not mistaken.
The Star Wars ones were with Jon Stewart on that women's panel thing. The other comments that she made a while back are also getting mixed in, but now she was saying a lot of that comes from that more recent interview, and that's where the backlash is coming from, actually, is my understanding. So, yeah, but people have been starting to pull things from the past. Yeah, that was way after South Park. Yeah. And my whole thing was, I can't believe they're doubling down on this shit now after the South Park thing. And that's what's funny. And that's where I'm starting to wonder, and the way that this was soft announced the way it was with the Mando movie and stuff. But anyway, we got to get wrapped up here. I see what you're saying, Pinochet, but yeah, the timing doesn't add up, unfortunately, on that one. So Andre,
an interesting year. Yeah.
Andre, anything else we need to touch on real quick before we go?
I don't think so. I just want to say thanks to everyone for being here today. Thanks to our esteemed guest, Hoglo, and thanks to Script Doctor, still here. Thanks to Chato. Thanks to Cultured Casino. And of course, thanks to Script. To Six, I mean, they both begin with S. And all the other mods in the chat and everyone watching.
So yeah. Check us out. I'm going to be doing a 4K for you. I don't know if it's going to be tonight or at some point in this week, but we have to. There's been too many great announcements in last week and too much stuff to talk about. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to yet until recently. So I'm going to try to do that today. Otherwise, hope to see you guys on Midnight's Edge After Dark tomorrow. Script Doctor, anything you want to plug before we head out?
Oh yeah, in about an hour, I'm dropping a premiere where there's some additional thoughts with regards to the screenplay we reviewed on Saturday, on Saturday. So little Chad, if you haven't seen him on YouTube and also on Twitter, he read the script as well. He had some thoughts to share. So we talk a little bit more about John Madden and the Madden video game from this script that is still being pitched around Hollywood to this day. So look forward to that. It's a really cool conversation.
You know, that probably has more of a chance now to get made than ever before with a lot of the more recent films that have been made. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like the product biopic has become a new thing, and I know a few people have covered that subject, so it's not like anything I'm bring up. But yeah, it's become the new thing, like with the Cheeto movie, the BlackBerry, the Tetris, the
Air Jordans and that. You're right on point. Exactly.
McDonald's kind of started that with the founder. It feels like. Yeah.
My buddy
but anyway,
researched that movie.
Oh, I enjoy that movie actually. I liked it a lot. But anyway, Andre, anything else we need to cover?
I don't think so. I think we are pretty much up to speed. Everyone, be sure to check out later or maybe tomorrow for the next batch of videos. And with that, it is time for some koalas in the rain.
Koalas in the rain, koalas in the rain, no fucks given, koala, koala, koalas in the rain, koalas in the rain, no fucks given.